Elizabeth's life has changed completely. Now she's a little girl living in luxury. For the first time, she also has a strong, loving father whose arms make her feel safe. She now lives like true nobility, with plenty of food, clothes, and comfort. He can enjoy these good conditions for one reason: she remembers her past life, and that makes her desperate to keep this one a little longer. Back then, her name was Liz, and she never knew the warmth of a family. She spent her whole childhood alone, a poor commoner who barely had enough to survive. That's why she dreamed of reaching the royal court, hoping she might finally find a family there. She lived in the kingdom of El Tode during a dark time with no king. Power had been seized by a family known as the Scarlet-Haired Tyrants, led by Michael Walser. Known as the Devil of War, Michael crushed the nobles' resistance with brutal force. Then there was Adelina, whose beauty was as dangerous as her rule. She enforced laws that only helped her own power, though she also created a system that let talented people enter the court no matter where they came from. So Liz was thankful for that chance. She didn't want to spend her whole life under their rule, and at 15, she finally entered the palace. She worked hard and carefully, but things still went badly. Most people saw her as worthless, someone beneath respect. They dumped the hardest work on her and treated her with open disgust just because she was a commoner. Even during lunch, they refused to let her eat with them. They messed with her food and tossed her scraps instead. Liz endured every insult in silence. One day, someone offered her a handkerchief and gently asked if she was all right. When Liz looked up, she was shocked. It was Queen Claudia. Claudia was known as the ruler who saved the country from the tyrant dynasty. Later, Liz was called in for an important task, one they claimed only a commoner could handle. She was assigned to guard the kingdom's treasure, a glowing magic crystal. It was the biggest duty she had ever been given at court. But when she returned to check on it one day, the queen's daughter attacked her the moment she opened the door, striking with a screwdriver. Then the girl shouted to the guards that someone was trying to steal the crystal. Liz quickly explained she was its assigned guard, but instead of listening, they told her to prove she was innocent. Even the queen now acted like giving that job to a commoner had been foolish. Liz was crushed. She realized they had set her up from the start. A ring of knights closed in and forced her to her knees with their spear points. Claudia coldly declared that Liz had tried to steal the source of the kingdom's prosperity, then ordered her thrown into the dungeon and executed at once. Liz couldn't believe this was the same kind queen who had once supported her. Then she noticed the ruler's eyes, cold and empty. That betrayal hurt even more than the rest. Soon she was dragged to the guillotine where the crowd screamed for the dirty thief to die. In that kingdom, a commoner's life meant nothing. No matter how hard they worked, they got nothing back. And there was no way to escape that cruel cycle. Soon, even other commoners began hurling stones at her. One smashed into her head, splitting the skin as blood poured down, while the nobles watched without caring. They were all human, yet birth alone decided everything. By then, Liz had given up. She had no family to fight for. If she had one, maybe she never would have come to the palace at all. As the blade was about to fall, she used her last moment to beg the gods for a happy family. Then everything went dark. She understood her head had been cut off, yet somehow she could still breathe. At first, she thought she had reached heaven, but her body felt oddly heavy. When she opened her eyes, her hands were tiny and soft, expensive cloth surrounded her. Looking around, she realized she had been reborn as a noble child. She wanted to be happy, but feared it was only some illusion after death. Still, time passed, and nothing happened to prove it was a dream. So Liz finally accepted it was real. She didn't even mind being a baby who couldn't speak yet. What mattered most was that she finally had the family she had always wanted. But then something caught her eye and filled her with doubt. A portrait on the wall showed the family of those same tyrants. The bright red hair stood out at once. Only Michael had that color. Now Liz wasn't sure if being reborn here was a blessing at all. She remembered dying and waking up in this rich new life. But nobles lived on a level far beyond anything she had imagined. Even her crib was made of gold. When she tried moving, she managed to turn a little, which made her realize she was already a few months old. Still, one thought would not leave her alone. That red hair belonged to the Walser family. The most famous among them was Michael, the man who had executed dozens of nobles. His wife, Adelina, had blue hair and such striking beauty that even a prince had once pursued her. Their son, Julius, now served as chancellor and was called the first queen's right hand. He had also been there at Liz's execution and supported her death. She was glad to be born noble, but why did it have to be with the Walsers? Still, since she was just a baby, she hoped they would care for and protect her. But when hunger hit and her diaper got wet, she cried for a long time before anyone came. At last, a maid opened the door, but there was no warmth in her at all. She pushed a bottle into the baby's mouth. The milk was far too cold, so Liz turned her head away with a grumble. The maid saw the bottle tilt and assumed feeding time was over. She was about to leave, and Liz was stunned. She had thought noble nannies would be kinder, yet this one would not even change her diaper. She remembered that even poor families cared for their children better than this. By the next noon, she was alone again and nearly faint from hunger. Then the maid returned, flipped her over, and pressed a button on her outfit. An attached device automatically cleaned the diaper. That helped a little, but she was still starving. So Liz looked around and spotted a bottle on a table too far away, along with a big container that must have held the milk. Wanting it badly, she somehow made the jar float into the air. The shock broke her focus, and it crashed to the floor. The maid rushed in at the noise, and Liz quickly sank into her pillow like she had nothing to do with it. She expected anger, but the woman silently picked up the jar. Then, still without even looking at the child, she simply put things back and left. Outside, the maid reported that nothing had happened in the nursery. Liz realized she had magic, but chose to test it in secret. In her past life, she had little mana, so she had studied how to use it well. Now she tried making a small flame in her palm. Instead, a huge magic circle appeared, proving this tiny body held an enormous amount of mana. The problem was casting spells. She still couldn't speak properly. Even so, she could at least pull over a bottle and warm it herself. After a few tries, she finally got a bottle of warm milk into her hands. The moment she drank it, Liz was amazed by how good it tasted. After finishing, she even managed to burp on her own. Then, lying in the crib again, another question started bothering her. Through all this time, she had only seen maids, never her family. Liz found that strange. Even if they were tyrants, did they really not care about their own child? Soon, Michael returned to the mansion. The maids quickly told him everything was fine. They were too scared to even lift their heads when he passed. His icy stare was exactly what people expected from the devil of war, and his arrival shattered the baby's quiet routine. Little Liz had just fallen into a deep sleep after a full meal when, at his office door, Michael asked again if everything was in order. The maids tried to bring up Julius, but Michael didn't care to hear about him. He brushed them off and kept walking. Liz later thought it made no sense. In a mansion this huge, why were only 2 maids assigned to her? One barely tried at all, acting like caring for a baby was easy. The other clearly hated dealing with little kids. They kept dumping the work on each other and pretending everything was fine. This wasn't childcare, it was neglect. Any normal baby would have died by now. Then she felt a cold stare through the half-open door, something dark and unsettling. It was Michael, secretly watching her, and his gaze was terrifying. Liz thought he had come to kill her on the spot. But the door soon shut again, like he had changed his mind. She still couldn't make out his face or figure out who he was, but his aura alone scared her. Since he only came when the maids were gone, she even wondered if he wasn't part of the mansion staff at all. A few hours later, the door creaked again, and that same chilling stare returned. After a few days, Liz started getting used to it. The visitor always came at the same time. Even so, she couldn't understand why he only hid and watched without ever doing anything. Almost lied. Then she remembered people from her past life who were obsessed with babies. Since the secret watcher never took his eyes off her, Liz decided he must like children too. Then another thought hit her. Maybe this was her father. She tried to reach out to him, but only awkward noises came from her mouth. Gestures didn't help either, and he just ran off. In the end, she settled on one plan that had to work. The next time her father came to spy on her, Liz gave him a sweet smile, and finally it worked. He stepped inside and came over to her. He leaned over the crib, and Liz instantly regretted moving too fast. His face looked so scary she was ready to cry. Then she felt his hand on her head. Michael was gently patting her. For a moment, he didn't seem like a tyrant at all, just a normal father. Then the door opened, and the red-haired man went on alert. A maid entered with a tray. By then, he had already hidden behind the table and watched her in secret. But his size nearly gave him away when a vase behind him started to shake. Afraid the maid would notice, Liz grabbed her sleeve to distract her. The maid yanked her hand back in disgust, upset that the child had touched her. That made Liz lose her balance and fall back into the crib. It got worse. The maid loomed over her, ready to strike and put her in her place. Then Michael's voice cut in, demanding to know what she thought she was doing. Liz could only shut her eyes. Michael seized the maid's hand and bent over her like a storm, still pressing for an answer. The maid quickly claimed she meant no harm and was only caring for the young lady, but Michael didn't buy it. One look at the mess she had made told him enough. Furious, he called out her lies and said she dared deceive him to his face. Michael drew his sword, ready to kill her without hearing her begging for mercy. Liz was horrified. She only managed to scream, but that stopped him. Michael turned his attention to his daughter. Taking her little hand, he started asking why she was crying so hard. Liz couldn't speak. She could only whimper, but her pitiful look said plenty. Even a fool would have understood. Michael's face suddenly changed to shock and fear. Then he realized what his daughter wanted and ordered the maid thrown in prison. He promised that from now on, her father Michael Walser would protect her. For Liz, that was unbelievable. Still, she quietly waited to see what would happen next. Now she understood she had gone back to a time before this family fell apart. That also meant all this wealth would someday vanish. She had wanted a family, but this truth changed everything, and Liz wasn't happy about it. Even after they gave her a new nanny who treated her gently, she still couldn't relax. While caring for her, the nanny mentioned that next month Adelina would become chancellor, and called her a great woman. Hearing that, Liz burped right onto the nanny's shoulder like the words had disgusted her. The maid just thought it was a normal baby burp and went to get a towel. The real nightmare was that after becoming chancellor, Adeline would fall just 1 year later. That meant little Elizabeth had very little time left. She remembered her past life and had no wish to face death again. So with knowledge of the future, the little girl decided she had to save this family. So far, things were improving. They replaced the maid and even fixed up her room, but it was too soon to celebrate. She had to stop this rich life from disappearing. Elizabeth now had a mission and planned to see it through no matter what. It was just hard to imagine how a baby could stop a family's downfall. Still, she had learned a lot in her past life and remembered all of it. She had also learned plenty about people. So now she decided to start by studying the main problem. She hoped that wouldn't be too hard, but when her father leaned over the crib wearing a horrified expression, a chill ran down her spine again. It was the kind of face you'd only expect in a nightmare, except this was real life. Even so, this tyrant father had saved her from the cruel maid, so she needed to thank him somehow. Being stuck in a baby's body made that hard. Liz gave him a big smile and let out a long sound meant to say thank you. Her stretched little grin surprised Michael. He changed too, and that made Liz pee right away. Then she remembered that out of the whole Walser family, only Julius had survived. If she wanted to survive, she needed Michael as an ally. First, Liz wrapped herself in magic to withstand the pressure of his presence, otherwise she might throw up or wet herself again. At first, she thought Michael hated everyone. Later, she started to think he just didn't know how to connect with people, so she had avoided him. Now he was trying to bond with his daughter, but his face was still just as scary, especially his eyes. They were enough to freeze you to the bone and make anyone want to run. Michael was surprised she didn't cry this time, which seemed odd to him. After all, kids usually cried when they saw Miguel. Even dogs and cats ran away from him. Not wanting to stand out too much, Liz quickly started screaming. The maid, though, took it as a sign that the baby loved her father. Michael spun toward her so sharply that the new nanny got scared. He only wanted to know if she really believed that, but his stare made it look like he might crush her. Then he looked back at his daughter and accepted that the little one really liked him. You could see it in his eyes and even in the faint smiles he gave her. Liz realized that whenever he got nervous, his killing aura leaked out. Even so, she became sure that deep down, he didn't truly wish anyone harm. Then, while watching the nanny care for her, she suddenly wondered if her mother looked after her too. The maid explained that the lady fed her daughter milk and bathed her. Michael found that interesting, and suddenly rose from his chair. He declared that this time, he would bathe his daughter himself. The babysitter panicked at how sudden it was and tried to point out there was no need, especially since the baby's diapers cleaned themselves. But Liz was happy. Back in her past life, baths were rare, and now she was getting a real tub. Michael looked at the nanny, and without a word she understood everything had to be prepared at once. Soon Liz was changed and ready for her bath. Then her father lifted her straight out in front of him with both arms, which was pretty uncomfortable. The maid carefully told him not to hold the baby that way or she would get scared and cry. She suggested bringing her closer, and Michael actually listened. He pulled Liz tightly against his chest, so firmly she could feel every muscle in his stomach. It felt like being pressed against a stone wall. In the bath, Michael started looking over the bottles on the shelf. One was mint soap, another was shampoo for hair growth. Liz wasn't thrilled with any of it, but she endured the bath. Back in the crib, her skin still seemed to tingle. The problem was that her father had scrubbed her with a brush and perfumed soap. The memory was so awful, it even ruined her appetite. Still, she fell asleep after the bath, then woke with a strange pain in her stomach. Seeing her upset, the maid quickly sent for Michael. Once Liz was alone, a bright light appeared over her belly. It grew into a little cloud, and that energy lifted her into the air. A minute later, her father burst into the room in alarm. He rushed to the crib with the nanny right behind him. Liz was asleep, breathing softly, and Michael relaxed a little when he saw she seemed fine. Even so, he ordered them to call the doctor right away, just to be safe. The maid hurried off at once, while Michael stayed by the crib. Meanwhile, Liz suddenly found herself back in her old body. The shock hit her hard. Nothing like this had ever happened before, and she even wondered if she was dreaming. She was standing beside the same crib where her baby body lay sleeping. Since nothing happened, Liz quietly left the room and looked back at the pink-haired baby. The child seemed to be resting peacefully, but Liz had no idea why she had returned to her old form. She even checked whether the baby had died after she left its body, but the moment she touched it, she blinked and became a baby again. That was when she started to suspect she had gained some strange power. To be sure, she tested it again, and transformed once more. Still stunned, Liz stared at the sleeping baby. Then she noticed the odd pressure in her stomach was gone. A faint tremor ran through her hand, and she realized the magic had come from her. The burning in her belly had turned into a power that let her become herself again. She could stay in her old body as long as the baby remained asleep. But the second she touched the child, she went straight back into the baby's body. She had once read that this could happen from too much stored magic, and lately she really had not used much magic at all. That explained the sudden burst of energy. While Liz was thinking it through, Michael came back and called from the door, asking if she was all right. The little girl answered with a bunch of baby noises, making it clear she was fine. Then Michael brought in a short, bald old doctor with a thick beard and demanded to know what was wrong with his daughter. The doctor could not answer yet. He had to examine her first. When Michael pushed him to hurry, the poor old man nearly had a heart attack from fear. Liz had to calm her father with a sweet smile, and that finally left him speechless. While Michael stood there, completely melted, the doctor checked the baby. It did not take long, and he said she was healthy. Michael still did not believe him, since she had refused food and acted like her stomach hurt. His harsh tone nearly made the old doctor lose his breath again. Liz did not want the kind old man to drop dead, so she decided to step in. She tried to speak, but only managed baby sounds that seemed to ask for a hug. Of course, she reached for Michael, hoping he would stop scaring the doctor. As her father, he somehow understood what she wanted. A moment later, she was in his arms, and she kept his attention on herself. She wished she could explain that the pain came from too much magic, but she could not say it. Feeling a little embarrassed, Liz simply relaxed while Michael held her and walked around with her for a bit. Later, he set her back in the crib, thinking she had fallen asleep because her eyes were closed. But Liz was only pretending. She wanted to be alone, so she could try her magic again. After a little effort, she returned to her old form once more. Her baby body drifted off to sleep, and Liz went to the mirror to look at herself. She looked much better than in her previous life. Her skin was clearer, and the dark circles were gone. More importantly, this gave her a better chance to figure out how to save her family. Still, in that form, she could not wander the mansion dressed like that, so she decided to find a maid uniform. Her wish came true at once, and her clothes changed into one. Since that body was made of magic too, she could change outfits whenever she wanted. Now Liz finally had a look that would not draw attention. Then she set out to test it by exploring the mansion. To her, it felt like a little adventure through a noble house. She even went outside for a while to check the garden and enjoy the scents there. Back in the room, Liz kept trying different things and soon confirmed that all 5 of her senses worked just like a real person's. Hours passed, and she still had not seen even half the mansion. The place was huge. Her magic body was fine, but trying to remember all those hallways wore her out. Then she decided to find Michael's office. Right then she spotted a maid walking by with a tray. Liz did not know where the maid was headed, but the smell was amazing. She caught the scent of high-quality tea and had an idea. The maid was taking sweets to Michael's office. Soon she reached the office, knocked, and said she had brought the tea. From inside came Michael's voice, so deep through the door that it sounded like it rose from hell. He was buried in a pile of paperwork. The maid brought tea and chicken sandwiches because they had run out of venison. Michael gave her a deadly glare, even though it was not her fault. Then he abruptly asked for every detail about Elizabeth, how much milk she drank, how the bath went, and whether her breathing was normal. The maid had no answers, and his stare made it clear this was not the time to ask questions. Then Michael headed for the door. With his magic, he could hear what was happening nearby. When he stepped out, he nearly caught the intruder, adult Liz. But she used magic just in time, so when Michael opened the door, no one was there. That only confused him more, because he had clearly felt magical energy. Michael was certain someone had been there, and the mystery bothered him. Still, instead of searching for the intruder, he went somewhere else. Worried about his daughter, he went straight to see her. Liz greeted him with a smile to show she was perfectly fine, though she found it a little strange that he checked on her first. At that moment, she had barely managed to hide from him. Using a magic circle, she quickly returned to the nursery. And just as Michael reached for the door handle, Liz was already at the crib, stretching out her hand to slip back into the baby's body. A few seconds later, and he might have found out her secret, which she absolutely did not want. Once Michael was beside the crib, he admitted he wanted to bathe her again. A chill ran through Liz at the memory of that rough brush. Luckily, he did not have time because too much work had piled up. That reminded her how his office was always full of papers. She found that odd since he was the head of the Order of Knights. Liz still could not understand why her father handled everything alone when there were barely any servants around. Even while exploring the mansion in her old form, she had hardly seen anyone. Michael picked her up and asked if she was afraid of him. He added that those hands had taken many lives. Liz whimpered in reply. She knew what Michael did, but she also understood it was necessary. The tyrant commander of the Knights had to crush rebellions. Even if he hated doing it, he did it for the good of the country, not for himself. Michael was sure the baby understood none of this. He had no idea Liz understood every word and wanted him to keep talking. She tried to show it, but there was only so much a tiny baby could do. Then Liz noticed a faint smile appear on her father's face for a brief moment. It caught her off guard, but it was nice to see, and her own gaze turned softly puzzled. She looked so cute that even the nanny smiled, while Michael started wondering if something was off. The maid quietly thought he was actually getting much better at holding the young lady, and it was true. Liz felt genuinely comfortable in his arms. Very comfortable, in fact. That was because Michael had apparently destroyed dozens of pillows practicing how to hold a baby. Then a servant came in and announced that the other knights were waiting for his report. Much as Michael wanted to stay with the adorable little girl, he had to go. Liz yawned so the nanny would lay her down and leave her alone. Once that happened, Liz started practicing her magic again. Her spirit slipped out of the tiny body and took on her old form again. She worried that her plan to grow closer to her father would be delayed by all his work, and that would only make the family's fall come faster. Only by fixing things now could she change the future. Still, it was strange that the Knights General spent so much time in the mansion. Liz had also noticed he was not even handling the paperwork properly. If she had been given that job, she could have finished it in no time. As she walked the hall disguised as an ordinary maid, she suddenly came up with a great idea. The servants usually kept the papers in Michael's office, so if Liz sorted and filled them out herself, her father would only need to sign them. She was sure he would like that and be grateful for the help. But for now, she had no way to do it, and Michael kept working. Liz watched him through the window, hoping he would soon have more time for her. Time kept passing, but Michael stayed locked in the office, doing the same thing for hours. Realizing this could not go on, Liz started thinking of another plan. Still, whenever her father came to see her, Liz felt truly happy. She loved it most when he held her to his chest and gently rubbed her belly. In moments like that, she felt her efforts were really bringing them closer. Michael was amazed that someone so tiny could handle the magic coming off him. He knew it was only possible because of her own magic and the memories from her past life. To Liz, it felt less like magic and more like a crushing aura. Even knights shook around him. Michael found that embarrassing. If a baby could bear it, why couldn't they? Still, there was one other person who could handle his aura. Michael told his daughter she had an older brother she still hadn't met. He said the name slowly, Julius, as if it carried a warning. Liz only then realized she had gotten so caught up with her father that she completely forgot Julius, the last survivor of that cruel tyrant family. At that same time, the boy was at school, surrounded by suspicious looks. A servant told Julius his father had skipped sword training that day. The reason was shocking. He was busy taking care of a small child. Julius could hardly believe the war demon would do that instead of training. Liz had completely forgotten her brother, even though his personality was awful. Now she understood why there were so few servants in the mansion. Either her father trusted only a chosen few, or everyone was simply afraid of him. Then she thought it might be good if the future chancellor helped his overworked father. The plan seemed perfect. That way her father would surely have more time for her. In the past, Julius had been the queen's right-hand man and was known for his courage. Rumors even said he only listened to the Queen's savior. He was also famous for his beauty and icy stare. Liz could never forget that look, especially when he accused her of stealing the state jewels. He saw her as a rat dreaming of serving under Her Majesty. He grumbled that trash like her was ruining the palace's authority. In fact, every time they met, he rubbed her low status in her face and kept throwing insults. They didn't meet often, but it was more than enough for Liz to hate him. Now she realized Julius was nothing like his father except for their hair color. After entering the palace, she had secretly studied the records of the nobles. Those files said Julius entered service at 12. She hadn't thought much of it back then, but that was far too young for court service. So there had to be a serious reason for sending him there as a child. Meanwhile, Julius still couldn't believe his father had skipped the schedule he himself created. The servant repeated that Michael postponed training because Miss Elizabeth wasn't feeling well. Furious and still doubtful, Julius ordered the carriage prepared. He would check for himself. Meanwhile, Michael kept talking with his daughter as he went out into the garden. The nanny had suggested it, saying sunlight was important for a child's health. Liz liked it so much she nearly drifted off. Then Michael noticed a carriage entering the yard, even though he wasn't expecting any visitors. The nanny offered to check who had arrived so suddenly, but Michael refused because the carriage was already heading straight for them. The moment it stopped, the door flew open and Julius jumped out. Right away, he saw his father sitting there with a baby in his arms. He shouted so loudly in shock that the birds took off from the trees. Little Elizabeth got scared at once, not understanding where that awful voice came from. She had her back turned to him and couldn't even see him. Any child would be frightened by a sudden yell, so tears instantly filled her eyes and she couldn't stop them. Of course, she burst into baby cries and the nanny rushed over. Julius knew he had messed up when his father's terrifying aura started to rise. The pressure hit the boy so hard that even his ears began to ache. Then it all settled down, because Michael didn't want to upset his daughter. Calmly, he asked his son why he wasn't at the academy. Without waiting for an answer, he ordered Julius in a harsher voice to go back immediately. Julius couldn't disobey. After bowing, he returned to the carriage. To Liz, he didn't seem at all like the man she knew from her past life. Still, the fresh air had done its job, and the baby began getting sleepy. She tugged on the nanny's sleeve, hoping she would understand. Michael noticed first and told the servant to put his daughter to bed. As he lifted her, Liz thought his words must have hurt Julius. Of course, she was sure her father never meant to hurt him, but even in a tyrant family, things between parents and children aren't simple. Later, Julius found a quiet spot, sat down, and sank into thought. He was so hurt he nearly cried, so he hid where no one could see him. Then he noticed a girl in uniform with blue hair coming toward him. With a gentle smile, she asked if he was okay. Startled that someone was prying into his feelings, Julius demanded to know who she was. It was Liz. She introduced herself as a new maid and said she had heard him crying. He denied it right away, insisting he wasn't crying at all, just dust had gotten in his eyes. Right now, he looked like a little angel, and Liz could hardly believe he would grow into a monster. This was the same person who used to humiliate her at every turn and even supported her execution. But for now, he was only a child, so she told him his father didn't hate him. Julius was shocked, thinking she had seen too much and was sticking her nose where it didn't belong. Sitting beside him, she explained she had only heard it by chance because she worked nearby. Then Julius realized he felt strangely calm around this girl, even though he usually hated women. He tensed again when she proposed a plan. She even gave it a childish name, United Family, and felt pleased that the first step had already been taken. Julius fell silent, even wondering if the girl beside him was really an adult. Then he bluntly said the name was incredibly stupid. Liz didn't get angry. Instead, she noticed that the boy who had been crying a moment ago was now interested. She couldn't wait to explain the details of her clever plan. Still, his tone was full of arrogance, like he was about to mock her again. It was just more proof that the tyrant's son was still a tyrant, after all. That much was clear. Now Liz had to keep herself under control and act more mature. Without meaning to, she made herself look silly, and Julius teased her again. Liz knew he wouldn't change overnight, but she still wanted him to become kinder. On that day, Julius stayed home, and that night he ate dinner with his father. Liz was there too in her baby body with the nanny, and the mood felt painfully tense. She had told Julius to start by sharing his academy achievements and earn some praise, so he said he was ready to return to class tomorrow. Then he added that he had placed first on the last exams and also won the fencing tournament. Michael silently showed approval after each thing he said. Elizabeth noticed her brother was not just smart but strong too. Just what a chancellor should be. She wanted to praise him herself, but all she could do was make baby sounds. Next, the plan said Julius should offer his father his favorite food. Michael loved deer meat, but there wasn't any at home right now. So when he approached his father, Julius suggested they go hunt deer together. Michael was in his daughter's room then, and he liked the idea, but he didn't show it. He only muttered that he was too busy. Julius refused to give up and asked if he could go home alone to get the meat. Michael saw no reason for that either, which made the plan much harder. Watching him shut down every chance his son had, Liz still had no idea what to do. Then she told Julius to act a little spoiled, and just behave like a kid. He was offended at once. He said he had never heard anything more ridiculous, though he also knew he wouldn't find out if it worked unless he tried it. Even so, he refused completely. In this house, they weren't just father and son, they were members of the Walter family, and there was no place for childish nonsense. Michael was the head of a famous tyrant family, so real family warmth seemed impossible here. Liz had to accept that bitter truth and apologized for her dumb idea. Julius only mocked her for believing a maid's words. He also admitted he was a little jealous that his father gave all his attention to the baby, so for Michael to truly notice his son, Julius believed he had to achieve far more. That was why he planned to become very strong, even stronger than his father. Still, there was no promise Michael would treat him better even then. That was when Liz came up with another brilliant idea: to get him hugged. The second she explained it, Julius said it was doomed to fail. She couldn't really argue with that, so Liz started thinking up more plans. As she wrinkled her nose while thinking, Julius actually seemed to brighten up. When he called her weird, Liz almost gave up because his teasing had worn her out. But then she realized his stubborn behavior wasn't entirely bad. No matter what, this was still better than leaving that boy to suffer alone. Later, while heading back to his room through a dark hallway, Julius decided it was the perfect time to use a secret trick. A teacher at the academy had told him it could work in any situation. He used the chance at once and went to Elizabeth's room. The girl was drifting to sleep, but she opened her eyes when she heard footsteps. Then Julius's face appeared over her with an ominous, and Julius only looked scary for a second. He was really just trying to play with his sister, hiding his face with his hands and popping back out. Elizabeth loved it right away. Julius was glad he had made his little sister smile. He even smiled to himself until Michael's sharp voice suddenly asked what was happening behind him. Michael somehow assumed Julius might hurt the baby. Julius quickly explained it was just a game his teacher taught him to cheer children up. Then, without warning, Michael covered his own face. Liz and Julius realized he was copying the game. But when Michael suddenly uncovered his face and shouted that he was there, both kids were startled. His aura burst out so hard it knocked Elizabeth from the crib, and Julius lunged to catch her. He caught her just in time before she hit the floor. Liz was so shaken, she briefly thought the real Elizabeth had just died. Terrified, Julius started apologizing for the idea. He never imagined something so simple could be dangerous for a baby. Michael understood the problem too, so he didn't blame his son. Instead, he put a hand on Julius's shoulder and praised how fast he reacted. That praise made Julius light up. Smiling, he thanked his father, then said he would protect his little sister. He held Elizabeth with amazing care, like she was a tiny kitten. Liz was happy the plan had worked and that this was a good first step. More than that, Julius clearly adored the little girl smiling in his arms. She also knew she needed him as an ally if she wanted to become chancellor someday. When she saw him again in his adult form, Liz congratulated him for pulling the plan off. She may not have come up with the game, but what mattered was that Julius and Michael had gotten a little closer. Julius pushed back, saying he had no interest in being friends with servants. Then Liz told him he should refuse the palace invitation and spend more time with his father instead. That instantly threw him off. His face hardened with anger. He had never told Michael about that invitation, so how did a maid know? That made him think her behavior had always been suspicious. From there, Julius jumped to a terrible idea that she might be a spy. Liz rushed to deny it, realizing how bad this could get. One careless piece of advice had almost put her head on the chopping block. Julius waited for an answer, fully ready to report her to Michael. Liz's mind raced as she searched for any way out. Nothing came. For a moment, it felt like her life was really in danger. Panicking, she blurted out that she was Elizabeth, then instantly realized how awful that sounded. Julius stared at her like she had lost her mind and asked her to say it again. Liz grabbed her head, knowing she had only made things worse. She tried to take it back, but it was too late. When Julius moved like he was about to call their father, she dropped to her knees and grabbed his hand. Liz promised to tell him everything, while warning he probably wouldn't believe it. Julius pinched her cheek and told her to explain properly, instead of talking nonsense, so she asked him to come with her to Elizabeth's room. He had no idea why there, but he agreed to hear her out. Since words weren't enough, Liz decided she would show him. She leaned over the crib and touched the baby's body. The moment her fingers made contact, bright light poured out. In the next instant, adult Liz appeared beside Julius. Elizabeth called to her little brother, and he looked around in confusion before finally realizing Liz really was Elizabeth. Then Liz wondered if she could switch back again. The magic worked easily, and her adult body appeared in the room once more. Looking into the crib, Julius saw the baby lying there in a deep, endless sleep. Liz explained that when her soul leaves, the body stays behind like it's in a coma. She also told him this new adult body was created through Elizabeth's magic. Julius still had trouble accepting it, but now he badly wanted to know how all this happened. His curiosity was as intense as in her past life, when he used to keep her working late into the night. Liz finally agreed to tell him everything, warning him it would take a while. Of course, she chose not to reveal every detail, especially her execution. What mattered was proving she wanted what was best for this family. She explained that in her past life, she was just an overworked employee who died from exhaustion. Then Julius remembered an old text about a mage who could see the future and create bodies from magic. That was enough for him to believe she had been reborn and sent back in time. Even so, Liz kept one thing to herself. She couldn't tell him the family was doomed. In her previous life, while working in the archives, she had found a report. It said the tyrant Michael entered the enchanted forest alone and got surrounded by magical beasts. He fought fearlessly, but there were too many, and no help ever came. There, Michael died holding a magic crystal, the same crystal that later became a national treasure. After his death, it passed to Julius, who presented it to the royal family. After the family fell, Julio was finally able to rise. The report also said no one came to help Michael because Chancellor Julius ordered it. Liz could never tell Julius that in the future he would betray the father he admired so much. He was a little upset that she hid part of the future, but he accepted it. To him, knowing the future wasn't the most important thing anyway. What mattered more was the choice he made now. Michael was building that future in the present, and Julius wanted to become someone worthy of standing beside him. Liz was relieved to see him in a better mood, and even more relieved that he listened instead of running off to accuse her of spying. His resolve gave her hope that this tragedy could be avoided, and if something still went wrong, she believed her brother would gladly protect their father. Really, the only thing this family still lacked was a loving mother. Then a noise came from the door. Someone was about to enter. Liz touched the baby's body and switched back just before the door opened. A new maid stepped in and shyly told Julius that Michael wanted to see him. Julius looked at his sister, who was already back to making baby noises. He told her not to look at him like that. His father was waiting. So he needed to hurry, and the baby let out a sound like she agreed, but then Michael's shadow suddenly fell over them. Seeing Julius doting on his sister caught him so off guard that chills ran down his back. Julius turned around and called to him, almost asking why he was there. What worried him more was whether Michael had heard everything. Michael glared at the maid and she quickly apologized for not bringing Julius at once. Meanwhile, Elizabeth turned her head back and forth, hoping nothing bad had happened. Then Michael picked her up and Liz checked his aura. When she sensed he hadn't heard anything, she silently let Julius know. One look was enough for him to understand. They were safe. Then Michael said that next month, he and Elizabeth would go to the palace and he asked Julius to come with them. For once, their conversation felt almost normal, and that made Liz really happy. Even if Michael's aura still scared everyone around him, it showed most clearly in the nanny, who always looked terrified. Even when she fed the baby perfectly, she still trembled the whole time. Ironically, in her past life, Liz struggled to get into the palace at all. Now, as a noble lady, she could enter it with hardly any effort. She would even get the chance to see her mother, the legendary villainess. Later, Julius went to help Michael with paperwork, just like Liz had suggested, saying it would help him get closer to his father. But Michael worked in silence, and Julius started doubting it would help. Then they began talking about whether knights should be doing office work at all. Michael said knights are most useful on the battlefield against magical creatures, and that his own work was what kept Elizabeth safe. Julius still didn't get why that meant the paperwork couldn't be skipped. Even so, he said he wanted to help while he still had time. He was free until next month's appointment ceremony, the day Adelina Waltz would become Chancellor of the Kingdom of Eldot. To Julius's surprise, Michael didn't object to the help. Then a maid rushed into the office, clearly alarmed. When Michael demanded to know what happened, she was shaking. Stammering, she started to say something about the young lady, but before she could finish, Michael and Julius ran to the nursery. At that moment, Elizabeth was lying in her crib thinking about the trip to the palace. All that place held for her were awful memories. No one wants to return to the place where they were killed. Worse, she might run into the first queen, the one who ordered her execution. The thought scared her so much that she tensed up and wet herself. Even so, she was also curious to meet the legendary villainess Adelina. Adelina was a gifted woman who stood out under the current king's rule. Her rule was simple. Skill mattered more than birth or gender. She judged people by what they did, not their rank, and even nobles weren't spared if they crossed the line. Commoners admired her, but the nobles hated her. She wiped out corrupt top officials left over from the previous king's time. As a reward, Adelina became the first woman chancellor in history. People called her a fatal beauty, and thanks to her, Liz had been able to become a court official in her past life. Now that the palace visit is close, Liz decides she'll at least learn how to ask for help. In the end, Elizabeth let out long, drawn-out sounds, and that's what alarmed the maid. But when Michael rushed in with Julius, he thought his little sister was singing. Honestly, the baby's long sounds did have a bit of a melody to them. Hearing that, Michael shouted again in surprise and excitement, naturally scaring the poor baby half to death. Startled, she bounced out of the crib again, but Julius caught her like last time. This time, he handled it better and stayed on his feet, while the maid just stood in the corner trembling. A month passed, and the family gathered to head to the palace. Elizabeth stared with great curiosity at her father's knight uniform. Its broad, firm chest made a perfect place for the little girl to nap. They left in a carriage pulled by 4 white horses. Miguel reminded his son that the palace isn't like home where the servants are bound by magic. The boy understood what his father meant and promised to be careful. Liz was curious to learn that her father had made magical contracts with every servant, though some still weren't doing a very good job. After a short, gently swaying ride, they arrived at the palace. Miguel carried his daughter the whole time, and the maid came with them too. The little girl studied the palace. It looked a little different to her now. It seemed grand, almost like nothing terrible had ever happened to her there. Even so, she still didn't want to go inside. Miguel noticed her discomfort and assumed she needed a diaper change, while she tried to protest with just a look. A maid led them in, saying Adelina was already waiting. As they walked, Liz realized these were halls she had never seen before. Then came the moment to meet the legendary villainess. They entered a private office that felt enormous. Adelina looked surprised to see that tiny child in Michael's arms. Liz quickly noticed the dark circles under her mother's eyes, her tired face, and messy hair. Everything about Adeline screamed workaholic, just like the old Liz had been. Even Michael softened at the sight and told her to rest, but Adelina refused. She had to work for the kingdom's future, and she claimed she could go a long time without sleep. Her son asked her not to push herself so hard, and she seemed pleased by his concern. Liz, though, felt something was off. A villain shouldn't be this hardworking. It really seemed like someone had been spreading bad rumors about her on purpose. Then Adelina suddenly asked why they had brought that child here, calling Elizabeth this as if she didn't matter. Michael replied that he was personally taking care of her. Julius stepped in too, saying she was his little sister, not an object, and she had a name. Adelina already knew that and said that was exactly why she had told Michael not to bring that thing near her. That hit the girl hard. She had tried so much to fix this relationship and save the Walzer house from ruin, yet she still couldn't understand why her own mother hated her so much. It was so bad that Adelina couldn't even call her by name, couldn't even call her daughter. Now she was shouting for the child to be taken away at once. Julius was stunned by his mother's behavior and only Michael seemed to know more. Even the maid started twitching, unable to understand why Adelina hated the baby so much. Elizabeth couldn't hold back her tears. The same question kept repeating in her mind. Why does my own mother hate me so much? She won't even say my name. Then Michael told the nanny he wanted to visit the Order of Knights before the ceremony, and asked for his son to come with him too. Still shaken, Julius quietly obeyed his father. Elizabeth trembled in fear, thinking they were about to leave her behind. At the doorway, Julius looked back at his sister one more time, hoping things would be okay. But Adelina snapped that they should take the child too, and Michael answered in a cold warning tone that nothing bad would happen if she stayed. With nothing left to argue, Adelina only let out a tired sigh, like she was bracing for torture. The girl, already upset, started squirming until the nanny tried to calm her. That only annoyed Adelina more, and she ordered the maid to leave the child there. The maid couldn't disobey, though she still needed to feed the baby. Elizabeth suddenly quieted down and began looking around, now curious about her mother's office. Among the papers on the desk, she noticed something glowing with magic. Once the girl settled, the maid left to prepare tea for the lady. For Liz, it was the perfect chance to snoop while her mother wasn't paying attention. She used magic to pull the glowing piece of cloth toward herself, but the moment her tiny fingers touched it, something strange happened. Then the air around her shifted, like she had slipped into another reality. In front of her was her mother, holding that handkerchief, and there was no hatred on her face at all. Instead, Adelina moved toward the child with clear concern. Then Liz noticed the maid beside her mother preparing tea. This wasn't ordinary tea. It used special flowers and had to be made a certain way, mixing the petals with common tea leaves. Liz remembered those petals from a book in the royal library in her past life. In small amounts, the plant was medicine, but in larger amounts, it became poison. Then the vision ended just after Adelina drank it. The girl had no idea what had just happened, but she knew it wasn't a dream. She hadn't been asleep. Still, it felt so real that when the maid returned with the drink ready to serve, Adelina, without even turning, told her where to place the tray and cup. Liz couldn't help wondering if this maid had always looked so pale. Then it hit her. The vision was real and showed the future. That meant the cup the maid brought wasn't tea at all, but poison. Liz froze, unsure what to do and still hoping it had just been a dream. Yet if the tea truly was poisoned, she'd never forgive herself for doing nothing. Since she couldn't speak properly, her only choice was magic. She tensed and tried to pull the cup away from her mother, but just then, a palace maid entered and announced it was time for Adeline to get ready. Liz watched the maid, who had gone even paler and looked terrified. But there was no time, and the maid picked up the basket holding the baby. The moment they stepped out, someone else stopped them. It was the local mayor, who said he would take care of the little lady now. The maid asked for the baby back, saying she had been trusted with the child. He brushed her off and ordered her to handle something more important. He used the tea delivery as an example, saying she still hadn't done it. When she tried to explain that she had already served Lady Adeline, he acted like he believed her and said she had earned a rest. But it wasn't a rest at all. The moment they were alone, he stabbed her in the stomach. Blood ran from her mouth as the life slowly left her eyes, and Elizabeth understood at once this man was no servant. Meanwhile, Julius and Michael were walking through a long corridor. Julius worried that leaving his sister behind had been a mistake, but Michael still believed he had made the right call. He thought it was finally time for Adeline to sit down and make the proper choice. Then all at once, Michael felt a horribly familiar sensation. He looked around in growing alarm, and Julius asked what was wrong. Michael couldn't explain yet. He only said they needed to go back immediately. The killer checked the maid's body to make sure she was dead, then picked up the basket with the terrified child. Elizabeth couldn't understand why this was happening or who was behind it. He got ready to leave, throwing one last insult at the maid, but she was still alive. Using the last of her strength, she grabbed his leg and begged him not to touch the girl. Even with her life fading, she only worried about Elizabeth. The stranger was furious that she dared touch him after failing her task. He slapped her hard to make her let go, then ground the back of her hand under his shoe. When the maid reached out with her other hand, he stomped it down with his heel. Elizabeth grew even more terrified and begged for it to stop. Her fear became so huge that instead of tears, magic started pouring out. Then everything around her burst into blinding light, like a star exploding. The man dropped the basket, blinded by the glow, and the half-dead maid caught it, so the little girl wouldn't be hurt. A moment later, Michael and Julius rushed closer. They saw the bright light at the end of the corridor, and Julius wondered what it was. Michael pulled out an artifact shaped like a straw and realized he had been right. That straw bit down between his teeth, so he called for the help he needed. They found the man by the pillar already dead. Nearby was a basket with the baby, and beside it lay a maid in a huge pool of blood. The little girl looked terrified. Seeing all that blood shook her almost as much as her execution had. Then she heard Michael tell Julius to take his sister. Michael rushed to check the wounded maid, hoping she was still alive and could tell him something important. One look at the man foaming at the mouth told him enough. He had taken poison, likely because he was a hired killer who didn't want to be captured. Then Michael looked at the girl and saw she had calmed down a little. Even so, he feared she might panic again, so he picked her up and gently soothed her in his arms. Liz settled a bit, but the shock still hadn't passed. A moment later, the normal cry of a frightened child finally came out. Her long wail echoed through the whole corridor. Liz knew all she could do now was cry from fear. Michael's arms helped a little, but the tears kept falling and her sobs wouldn't stop. Servants quickly rushed in to help the maid and tried to save her. Liz didn't want to look, so she pressed into Michael's chest, and he turned her away from the bloody scene. Once she calmed a little, he placed her back in the basket and handed it to Julius. Now Michael felt the same strange sensation he had sensed days earlier at the mansion. Julius also noticed his little sister was crying harder than ever. That made sense. Any child would be scared after something like this. Then a gentleman approached and told Michael that Mrs. Adelina was safe. The injured servant had stopped bleeding and her life was no longer in danger. But another servant found something odd in the attacker's pocket. In his palm were crushed flower petals. Michael recognized them right away, and his face twisted with anger. He snatched them up and said he would handle it himself. Soon the maid was carried away on a bed. Julius worried about both his mother and his sister. Michael promised to strengthen security around Adelina, but decided to watch over Elizabeth personally. That made Julius feel better. He thought he could return to the academy without worry. But then Michael said he would have to stay home a while longer. With clear anger, he added that anyone who dared challenge the Walser family would pay for it. After all the stress, Elizabeth fell asleep while the two kept talking, and when she woke up, she was somewhere completely different. She heard soft whispers of admiration behind her, and in front of her, a crown was being placed on her mother. Adeline's ceremony as chancellor had already ended. Michael and Julius noticed she was awake and smiled at her. Liz, meanwhile, worried about what she had missed, like what happened to that man disguised as an old servant, and what became of her nanny. As if reading her mind, Michael told her the maid had survived. He even praised his daughter, certain the girl lived because of her. That drew everyone's attention. People were shocked to see the feared war devil holding a child so lovingly. Rumors about how much he adored his daughter had been true after all, but one cold look from Walser made them back away at once. Even in this calm father-daughter moment, his presence still scared everyone around him. Liz was just happy both her parents were alive, and she decided she wouldn't let fear beat her again. She had promised to protect them. Sometime later, the wounded maid woke up in bed. The room felt unfamiliar, and she was stunned to realize she was still alive. Then she noticed several servants nearby. The terrible events before she passed out came rushing back. Panicking over the young lady, she tried to sit up and asked where the child was, but a sharp pain in her stomach made her freeze and curl up. A servant quickly told her not to worry. Elizabeth was with her father. That news finally eased the nanny's mind. Fear in her eyes turned into tears of relief when she learned the girl was safe. For a while, she just sniffled and wiped her wet eyes. Meanwhile, Walser sent the flower off to be studied, but the servants couldn't find that plant anywhere in the palace. Still, he needed to know why the maid had it in the first place. It turned out someone had threatened to kill her daughter, but now the child was under the order's protection. Elizabeth began to suspect the nanny never put the petals in the tea, and had lied to that man. That meant she had been worried about Liz the whole time. Even with her last strength, she still tried to protect Elizabeth. Michael grew concerned and decided to review the servants' magic contracts. Julius got curious about what happened to the attacker, but Michael told him not to worry. He simply said the man would never speak again. Liz then feared the attacker had died because her magic burst out of control. On top of that, Adeline started shouting that this was exactly why she had opposed bringing the child here. Julius asked her to calm down, but after everything that happened, Elizabeth found it strange. Her mother truly seemed to hate her. Liz whimpered, and Michael immediately gave her a milk bottle, which settled her down. Adelina watched him and noticed how naturally he handled the baby. Then Michael admitted he had been ordered to bring Elizabeth to the ceremony. Adeline couldn't imagine who would suggest that until she heard a voice behind her. When she turned, she went a little pale. Liz recognized the newcomer too. It was the first queen, Claudia, the same woman who had tricked her in her past life and ordered her execution. Fear returned to Liz's eyes and her whole body started trembling. Michael noticed and, not understanding why she was panicking, held her tighter. Liz couldn't relax near the queen, who was now young, yet still just as proud. Her gaze was the same one Liz remembered from the years of her cruelty. The child tried not to look, but her frightened eyes kept drifting back to Claudia. Liz tried to calm herself, reminding herself she was Elizabeth now, not Liz, so this woman should not be a threat. Claudia addressed Adeline, who reminded her the queen should be preparing for the party, but Her Majesty had heard about the incident and said she had to come. Mrs. Walser thanked her for the concern and said the matter was already settled. Claudia said a servant had tried to kidnap the Walser's daughter. Adeline repeated that it was handled and asked her not to trouble herself over it. The second queen was already in charge of the guest safety. Claudia carried that duty too, as a member of the royal family. On top of that, she claimed to be Adeline's friend and said she naturally worried about her. Elizabeth felt that same uneasy feeling again. She was now sure the first queen had not changed at all, inside or out. Then Adeline answered as a friend, making it clear she did not care about just anyone dying. Only the Walser heir's life mattered to her. Everyone else was like dust beneath her feet, not even worth noticing. Claudia pretended not to hear the insult and laughed behind her fan, but her eyes gave away her anger. Adeline stared right back as if they were fighting without a word. After that, Liz clearly felt the queen's pressure vanish. Then a servant reminded Claudia that she needed to get ready for the reception. In the end, the queen only congratulated Adeline on becoming chancellor, and said she hoped they would work well together in the future. Adeline thanked Her Majesty for the kind words, and Elizabeth noticed her mother had shifted Claudia's focus away from her. Even if she hated Liz, that still looked like protection. Still, remembering everything else, the little girl decided it only looked that way. Later, several maids helped Claudia into a beautiful red dress. While they worked, the queen ordered them to check the staff assigned to the guest rooms. One maid accepted the task, but Claudia hinted she would not get a second chance. The queen had a plan, and today it hadn't gone the way she wanted. Even so, she had learned something useful, especially about that little girl's magic. Through the same maid, Claudia sent an urgent message to the head chamberlain. It seemed the queen was already shaping a new plan, because someone else now needed her attention. Later, Elizabeth sat on a rug and practiced rolling over. She rocked her tiny body back and forth and was getting pretty good at it. She even managed to roll a short distance, though a bit clumsily. Still, she was happy to see herself improving more and more. By now, she could also summon a milk bottle for herself with ease. The baby had even learned to sit up without any tricks. To her, it felt like she was growing not day by day, but hour by hour, and she loved that. Her mother's appointment ceremony had gone well and the kidnapping was stopped, but Liz was still worried about the vision she had in her mother's office. Now she was more certain it had been a glimpse of the future, and she wanted to learn how to control this new power too. Later, the baby was taken out to the garden in a stroller for some fresh air. Her nanny had recovered and felt happy at every step, just knowing the child was safe. She was deeply grateful to everyone who had helped her. The nanny had also returned to work quickly because Michael allowed healing magic to be used on her. Michael had clearly approved of her. She risked her life to save the little one. Even so, the maid still didn't understand why she went that far. But after seeing the young lady and His Excellency getting along, she felt a stronger urge than ever to protect the child. The nanny noticed how Elizabeth looked at her with pure admiration, almost like she understood everything. And she really did understand every word. The maid just had no idea. By now, Elizabeth could tell her friendship plan with her father was finally starting to work. Then both she and her nanny noticed Julius coming over. He had come to take them to his father's office on Michael's orders. His gaze held none of its usual fear this time, and he was glad to see his daughter's nanny looking much better. Then he turned to Julius and said sword training would start again tomorrow. Julius understood that meant it was time to return to the academy. He looked at his little sister clinging to the nanny, clearly not wanting to part with her. Elizabeth met his eyes, almost like she was trying to tell him something, and then Julius asked his father about their mother. To him, Adelina seemed far too harsh with his little sister. Mikhail told him not to worry and said Adelina had her reasons. Julius didn't argue. He looked at Elizabeth again, and her smile seemed to tell him not to worry. Wanting to hold her, he walked straight over. At that moment, Liz was thinking that her mother could handle Julius. Still, Elizabeth reminded herself not to let anyone get too close, so there was no doubt the road ahead would be rough. With the baby in his arms, Julius headed for the door, leaving his father behind. But just then, the butler announced that a messenger from the palace had arrived. Liz guessed it was about the attack on Adelina. She wanted to hear more, but Michael ordered Julius to take the baby back to her room. Julius saw his sister's disappointment and silently urged her not to resist. Then she noticed her father's stern look so terrifying that she started trembling again. She tried to say something, but her brother was already carrying her out of the office. Soon after, the messenger came in holding a thick book, looking nervous. Michael stepped out from behind his desk, moved closer, and coldly ordered him to explain why he had come. That night, Julius came to the children's room and made sure no one was watching. Then Elizabeth used magic and took on her adult form again. Liz immediately asked why he dragged her away earlier. She had wanted to hear her father's conversation. Julius was more curious about why she didn't know what happened, if she came from the future. But her knowledge only goes as far as what Liz remembers. Even so, Julius didn't blame her. He was angrier at himself for being careless enough to risk a tragedy. Leaning over the sleeping baby's crib, he decided to train even harder. He admitted that he was struggling with swordsmanship at the academy. As heir to House Balser, he had to grow strong enough to protect everyone. Then Liz suddenly suggested that he take her to the academy. Julius was stunned and had no idea how that would even work. But Liz wanted to support the family member she had promised to protect. For a moment, Julius wondered how she had accepted his family so quickly. He also really wanted to know what had happened to the real Elizabeth. When he asked, Liz froze, not knowing how to answer. Seeing that, Julius told her she didn't have to answer if it was too hard. Before leaving, he promised to speak with Michael about taking her to the academy. Liz was grateful he didn't press her further. Not long after, everything was ready for the trip back to school. In the carriage, Julius sat across from his father, while little Elizabeth rested in her basket. The boy had agreed, though reluctantly, to bring his sister along. Michael was surprised at first, but Julius had a good reason. They would both be gone a long time, and the little one would feel lonely. So he made the request while holding his sister in his arms, looking at his father with such pleading eyes that no one could have refused. Michael was completely won over. Now they were heading to the academy founded by the king himself. For the nobles, this place was almost sacred. No one would dare harm a student there, and that was another reason Michael agreed. He sent the knights guarding the estate back to court. On the way, Liz tried to picture what the academy would really be like. In her past life, she never had the money to even think about applying there. This life was different, and her thoughtful mood caught her father's attention. He found it strange how much she moved, but Julius had read in a book that it was normal. He even added that babies that age should stay active, so Michael casually suggested teaching her swordsmanship. Both Julius and Elizabeth found that absurd. She could barely hold a spoon, and Julius knew exactly how brutal night training could be. All the little girl could do was let out a dark little grumble in protest. Later, they arrived at the academy, where a governess came out to greet them. She was clearly startled to see the tyrant standing there with a child in his arms. Then she said the academy's headmaster was waiting for him, and asked him to follow her. It was obvious an important talk was coming, so Michael decided to leave the child with Julius. Julius was thrilled to spend more time with his little sister and promised to watch her carefully. After his father disappeared through the door with the woman leading him, Julius suggested they look around. Elizabeth nodded, and he led her somewhere out of sight. There, Liz used magic and changed back into a young woman. This time she was also wearing a different dress, which surprised Julius a little. Liz explained that the dress was made with magic, so she could change her clothes however she wanted. It was very handy, and Julius had to agree. Then he picked up the baby body and covered its face so no one would notice it wasn't moving. As they walked on, Julius pointed out the library first. It was so huge that even the palace library couldn't outmatch it in books. Liz stared around with real excitement, amazed to be in a place like this. As they moved on, she suddenly noticed a messy stack of books on a table. The top one was glowing with magic. Curious, she stepped closer and instantly tensed. She knew that book from her past life, even though she had never truly read it. Once, a worker had thrown something at her, trying to hit her in the head. He never threw the next book because Julius called out to him, and the bully followed right away like an obedient dog. Back then, Liz had sat on the floor bruised and shaking, clutching the book. Those bitter memories rushed back the moment she saw the cover. Julius noticed she had suddenly stopped and asked what was wrong. She realized those books were meant to be thrown away and suggested donating them to an orphanage instead. Julius thought that was a pretty good idea and actually started thinking it over. Their conversation was accidentally overheard by a staff member passing by. But he said nothing and just kept walking up the stairs. Then Julius let out a deep sigh and said it was time for training. From his tone, Liz could tell he really didn't like sword practice. But the real issue wasn't fencing itself. What Julius hated was his instructor, who beat students with low mana while calling it special training. Julius had tried to stop him and failed. Then he heard familiar footsteps drawing near. It was that very instructor, greeting him in a creepy way. Even adult Liz was alarmed by the cruel smile on the man's face. Then she turned and froze in horror. It was the same person who had once thrown a book at her. For a moment, she thought he had come back just to mock her again. If she wanted to run now, she couldn't. Her legs felt rooted to the ground. That smug face was just as disgusting as it had been before. Still, he seemed more interested in the fact that the young master had decided to join training again. With fake politeness, he said he would eagerly await Julius's return, adding that his swordsmanship was improving far too slowly. He even bragged that he prayed for Julius's success every night. What he really wanted was for the boy to become like his father, a blood-soaked monster. That was the last thing Julius wanted. He only wished to grow stronger. After that, the man walked off, wishing the young trainee luck. Only then did Liz gather her thoughts and realize he had been mocking her brother. She went cold when she heard Michael compared to a monster. The memory had thrown her off badly, but now she pulled herself together and decided that Creep needed to be taught a lesson. Just as she was about to use magic on him, Julius stopped her and explained that after he complained about the instructor's methods, the man failed him in swordsmanship. Even so, Julius didn't regret it. Since the man had once belonged to an order of knights, Julius wanted to beat that scumbag in a fair duel. He could never forgive him, not after he mocked both his father and his mother. Hearing all that, Liz hated the bastard even more and wanted to crush him on the spot. She wasn't the same helpless person she used to be. Back when her mana was low, she was constantly targeted. And among the noble officials was one man obsessed with the idea that only mages were superior. He kept dumping work on her while calling her useless. Even so, Julius asked her not to step in. He was sure he could handle it himself. He didn't want to trouble his parents with this. All he asked from Liz was to stay close. Training began soon after, and the instructor scattered the students with mocking ease. Liz watched in horror as the beaten boys could barely get back on their feet. Then Julius stepped in and firmly told him to stop abusing the students. The instructor just laughed, calling it night training. If someone wants to protect the country, they must be ready to sacrifice their own body. He charged at Julius with full force, but Julius blocked the strike and held him back. The other blade slid off and cut Julius in the side. When they broke apart, pain shot through him, but he forced himself to stay standing. The vile teacher got ready to attack again, saying he would spare Julius's face only because he was the commander's son. Then he slammed him hard in the solar plexus. The others watched in horror. This man clearly meant to seriously hurt him, and Liz, who had been told not to interfere, could barely hold herself back. It hurt to watch her brother take such a beating. She wanted to trust Julius when he said he would not lose. Still, everything so far showed the opposite. One more hit and something might break. Then the boy, who looked nearly beaten, started to rise. He had always wanted to be like his father, someone unshakable, someone others could rely on. But no matter how hard he tried, Julius was bad at swordsmanship, and he hated himself for it. Even so, his wish to grow stronger never faded. It only grew because now there was someone he wanted to protect, his silly little sister, who had a strange talent for growing. Julius decided he would not lose here. He would win in his own way. What mattered most was not falling to a villain like this. He stood up, eyes burning with the will to crush his opponent. There was no fear on his face. Instead, a small smile appeared. The instructor hesitated, unable to read what Julius was planning. Julius used that moment to rush him, but the teacher still managed to dodge. Julius froze in surprise. He had been sure that blow would finish it, yet the man kept grinning like the attack meant nothing. Then a crack opened on his cheek, and red blood ran down. So the hit had worked after all, and the students began cheering for Julius. The instructor flew into a rage that someone had wounded his precious face. He threw aside his sword and chose another method, his magic. A crushing force wrapped around Julius and squeezed him from every side. Cuts started opening on his skin. Someone shouted that it was unfair, but the instructor kept going, muttering that this was part of the lesson and nobody else's opinion mattered. He kept yelling at Julius, calling him a monster's brat for daring to challenge a grown man. As he prepared another magical strike, Liz finally snapped. She quickly handed the basket with the baby to the student beside her and cast magic to shield her brother from the attack. She had been told not to interfere, but she could not just watch his body be torn apart. Now she was facing the man she once could not beat. Sure, she could stop him this time, but the instructor's power shattered her shield, and an explosion rang out. When the dust began to settle, he thought he had won since he was still standing. But as the dust cleared more, he saw Michael Walzer appear between the mounds. The cruel smile vanished from his face at once. Behind the tyrant stood the blue-haired girl, still protecting Julius. Even she was shocked that her father had shown up in the middle of it all. But he was never gonna let someone mock his son like that, so he chose to handle it himself. And his face made it clear he had no mercy left for that disgusting instructor. Liz ducked down, still shielding the child, and prayed with all her heart that Michael would not notice her. Everyone stared at the fight about to happen, and she found a chance to switch back. The instructor, voice shaking, asked what Walzer was doing there when he was supposed to be with the headmaster. He tried to excuse himself, claiming this was only a warm-up lesson before Michael arrived. But Michael was not moved at all. His pressure only grew stronger, until the instructor could not even stay on his feet and dropped to his knees. He kept insisting he was only teaching discipline, but Michael did not believe a word of it. Flame-like energy gathered in his fist, and with it he landed several brutal blows on the instructor. The man twisted in pain and screamed like he was being sliced apart. Then one last shove sent him flying backward, landing face down with only his rear sticking up. Right then, his son called out to him, already sitting just behind him. The other students were thrilled to see the awful teacher finally get what he deserved. Liz, back in the baby's body, watched the whole fight with excitement. But then she noticed her father looking at her in confusion, and she acted like she had nothing to do with any of it. Michael turned to his son and asked if he could stand. Julius was covered in bruises and scratches, but he got up anyway. Even then, he hated himself for being so weak. Julius was even expecting a cold lecture from his father, something like telling him not to complain. Instead, Michael gently patted his head and praised him for seeing his own flaws. He told him not to forget that feeling, because it helps a person grow stronger. Julius was surprised by that kind advice from Michael. It touched him so much, his eyes filled with tears though he blamed it on the dust. Then he promised his father he would become stronger, so he could protect his little sister, who was lying nearby in a basket, watching with a very pleased look. After that, the local doctor treated Julius's wounds. The instructor was still lying on the ground, awake and whining about how much he hurt. When he tried to get up, Michael shoved his head back into the floor with his foot. The scumbag started cursing before he even realized who it was, but then he looked up and saw Michael, who truly looked like a demon. His excuse about being the heir of a noble house meant nothing. Michael pressed his head down again, so he would not dare move, muttering that no one would complain if he crushed him like a bug. Even so, he did not kill him. He simply ordered the mess cleaned up and told them to investigate the man, so there would be no more like him at the academy. Meanwhile, Liz wondered why her magic had failed to crush that bastard. There had been an explosion, so maybe she had lost focus for a moment. Then her little brother picked her up, swore he would protect her, and told her not to worry. She nodded, even though he was the one who really needed protecting. While she answered with baby noises, someone else came over. It was a boy holding a small box in his hands. He brought Julius a healing ointment that would help his wounds close faster. And it was no ordinary ointment. It was medicine from the overseas kingdom of Vion that made it clear he was an exchange student. But Julius suddenly refused the gift. He said he needed nothing from this boy and told him to leave him alone. He did not just refuse. He angrily ordered him to stay out of his way. Liz could not understand what had gotten into her brother or why he was treating that student so badly. Then she realized the real Julius was starting to show. This was the one she knew, rude to everyone except the queen. He treated others like dirt under his feet. Liz thought he had only been kind to Elizabeth because she was family, and she hated admitting that this would not be easy to fix. Still, her inner voice told her she had not yet seen the full force of his anger. She used to think his personality came only from his issues with his father, but now she saw it was more than that, and she wanted to guide him onto a different path. The baby touched his hand and he turned to her with a real smile. That decided it. Since he truly cared about her now, she would try to change him. She wanted to teach him that when someone offers help, he could simply say his wounds would heal on their own. And if the classmate apologized, Julius could just thank him. Instead of snapping, he only needed to say the boy had already done enough. If this were a test in basic manners, Julius would have failed. Very few people at the academy would want to be close to him later. Even so, building connections was another way to keep the family from falling apart. That boy was still standing there, staring at Julius while Julius stared back. The air was getting tense again, so Liz decided to step in. When they returned home in her adult body, she gave him a bird toy. This stuffed bird had been forgotten among their father's gifts. Liz named it Pi because its eyes were made of glowing magic stones, and after sitting in her room so long, it had soaked up some of her magic. Now Liz could speak to her brother through it, and stop him from saying cruel things. Besides, that dark-haired student who brought the ointment would one day bring the secret to long life, meant especially for the last family. If Julius could become friends with him, the Walzer family might also be saved. With Pi, they could stay in touch even from far away. Julius did not understand why they needed that much contact, but he agreed in the end. Liz told him he only had to carry the toy with him. Julius agreed because he had sworn to protect his sister, and this way he could always know if something happened to her. Liz was honestly happy to hear him call her his sister. Then Michael, who had been looking for Julius, knocked on the door. Both of them tensed up. They definitely should not reveal the truth about her ability. Liz quickly touched the baby's body and returned to it just before Michael opened the door and walked in. He thought his son had been talking to someone, but only the crib was there. Julius claimed he had just been talking to himself, then asked why Michael had come. Michael said it was about the exchange student in Julius's class. Before that, Michael ordered all the tea from the neighboring country replaced for Adelina, and that boy is the son of the merchant guild leader who brings in tea and many other goods. Julio quickly understood what his father was about to ask. He agreed to try fixing things with that student. Satisfied, his father left, and Julio let out a long sigh. Now he had no idea how to keep that promise after speaking so badly to the boy. He looked to his sister for help. The little girl held out the stuffed bird, hinting that things would work out. Hearing her through the toy, he admitted he needed help. Later, Julius returned to the academy, planning to talk to the student. His name was Tisoa Nayirlas, and he came from the faraway land of Bian. Tiswea had already been scared of Julius, and after the ointment incident, he was even more nervous. On Julius's shoulder sat the ivy bird, and through it Liz spoke. She coached her brother, so he chose to approach Tiswea first and ask him to start talking with him. The toy acting alive made Tiswea uneasy. Julius felt awkward too. He was used to being watched at the academy, but having a bird on his shoulder made him self-conscious. Still, Liz realized it could help him connect with classmates, and Tiswea was watching them more than anyone else. At that moment, the boy was sitting alone on a bench, eating a sandwich with his head down. When he noticed someone in front of him, he looked up and saw Julius, nearly choking. But Julius didn't look hostile. He even had a small smile. Following Liz's advice, he politely asked if Tizoa always ate alone there. Tizoa said food tasted better outside, and Julius suddenly sat beside him. That startled the boy so much that he jumped up and apologized. Julius was about to leave, but Liz told him this was the perfect time to talk. Realizing his reaction had pushed Julius away, Tizoa asked him to wait. Julius turned sharply, which scared him again for a second. Then he admitted he only wanted to thank Julius for stepping in for them. They talked about the sword lesson, and Julius confessed he hadn't done it for everyone else. Bird Liz noticed her brother blush and secretly liked that. Then she suddenly lost her balance and tumbled down. Right before she hit the floor, Julius caught her and called her Elizabeth, asking if she was all right. Tsuchfa found it a little strange that Julius had named his toy. At that same moment, back in the nursery, the nanny picked up the baby, who looked sick. Elizabeth leaned on her shoulder, hit by a strong wave of nausea, then threw up. Worried, the nanny called for help. She ran to Michael, and he rushed to his daughter so fast he nearly knocked her over. When he entered, the room had gone quiet. The girl lay there with her eyes closed, arms spread out, and no sound of breathing. Michael ordered the doctor to be called at once, and only then did she barely open her eyes. She felt terribly weak and couldn't understand what was happening to her magic. Julius was told little Elizabeth was sick and came home as fast as he could. By then she was already feeling somewhat better. The nanny, standing watch, asked him to keep quiet. The doctor had ordered complete rest for the young lady, and Julius understood. Still, he hadn't come empty-handed and held out the little bird plush. He leaned close to wish his sister a quick recovery and asked her to explain everything from start to finish. Why had this happened? Seeing they wanted privacy, the nanny left. Elizabeth explained it started while she was watching the academy through LP. Then she heard something break near her room. Wanting to find out what happened, she tried to make a magic double. From her small body, Liz's adult form appeared again, but it lasted only a moment. Something suddenly went wrong, her strength gave out, and she passed out. A minute later, the nanny came in with water and a towel. Seeing the girl in that state terrified her. Now Liz still didn't know why she felt so bad. Maybe she had overused magic. She felt guilty that her brother had to leave school, but Julius told her not to worry and said missing one day wouldn't hurt him. They both figured this happened because a baby's magic is often unstable. Then Julius noticed something strange again. Liz's adult body started turning transparent like a ghost. Her magic was slipping out of control, and against her will she was being pulled back into her child body. Her eyes showed the shock of an adult mind. Worried this could end badly, and knowing nothing about it, Julius forbade her from making an adult double again until they learned what was happening to her body. He thought she never should have used such a hard spell in the first place, and using it over and over without understanding it was dangerous for Elizabeth herself. The girl protested, upset that it felt unfair. Even so, she agreed not to leave her body, though she still hoped to use LP. She was sure that would be safe because its eyes were magic stones. That meant she barely had to use her own power. Julius tried to argue, but after hearing her out, he agreed on one condition. If her magic starts acting up again, she stops using the toy. The next day, Julius headed back to the academy. LP sat on his shoulder while Elizabeth insisted everything would be fine. As soon as he entered the classroom, everyone looked at him, and the exchange student Tiswa seemed confused. Still, when Julius came closer, he gave him a shy greeting. Then silence fell, and Tizio stood frozen, shaking with nerves. He didn't know if he should restart the conversation so Julius wouldn't get mad, while Liz whispered from the bird that Julius should greet him first. Being simply nice felt awkward for Julius, so his usual pride got in the way. Even so, he muttered a good morning to Tizio without even looking at him. Then he walked off like nothing had happened. His little sister praised him with heavy sarcasm, though for Julius, even that had taken effort. Later in class, LP stayed nearby, curious about what her brother was learning. But Julius didn't speak to Tiswa again that whole day, even though he sat only 2 desks ahead. The next day though, even without Liz pushing him, Julius went over and apologized for rushing off yesterday, saying he had urgent business. Tiswa apologized too, blaming himself. He was so nervous he started sweating even though it was cool outside. Julius then brought up healing magic, saying he had heard Tiswa was very skilled at it. He proudly added that he knew a lot about his classmates, and his sister immediately scolded him for sounding arrogant. Tiswa was holding a book because he wanted to try combining healing magic with medicinal herbs. Since healing in the kingdom is controlled by the nobles, he believed this could help more people. By evening, Michael came to see his daughter. The doctor had examined her that afternoon and suggested they keep watching her for a few more days. As a diagnosis, he said it looked like the normal instability of magical energy seen in many babies, but Michael still worried she might have some other illness. That was possible, so the doctor told them to be ready for anything. Michael stroked his sleeping daughter's head and asked her not to suffer anymore. Even if he's a war demon, this little girl is the light of his family. Later, when Julius got home, he shared some news with his sister. Tiswa was coming to their mansion. Liz was a little surprised, not because they were having a guest, but because her brother called that student by name. To her, the important part was that Julius had managed to reach him. Julius insisted he only did it because his father ordered him to. Now he asked his sister to help during the visit. That made her happy, but Julio warned her not to even think about making doubles. He also nearly forgot to mention that their father had gone to the palace today. It was easy to guess he would meet their mother there, and Liz hoped Adelina wouldn't hurt herself by overworking. Her little brother thought she was too kind. As they talked, a maid saw them and felt glad the children were so close. Meanwhile, at the palace, an attendant came to Adelina and reported that Duke Waltz had arrived. She told them to let him in. Michael always looked impressive, but today he seemed even more polished. After entering, he asked how his wife was feeling, which struck her as unusual. Adelina said she felt wonderful, thanks to the tea he had sent. Some was still on her table while she was about to take a break. Rumor said the tea improved health, and after drinking it, she truly felt better. Just 1 cup made her fatigue fade, but Michael still asked her not to work too hard. She had also heard that Julio had found a friend skilled in healing magic. It even came up during the intergovernmental talks, and she never expected her son's name to be mentioned there. They also thanked Adelina because her son had helped that boy at the academy. She hadn't even gotten the chance to thank Michael for the tea, so she asked him to keep sharing important news like this. It would also quiet the nobles who opposed getting closer to Bianco. Most of the kingdom of Elthod's nobility is moderate, but some are ruled by greed and want to profit from war. Then Michael clearly told his wife that Elizabeth was Michael, made it clear that Elizabeth was fine, and Adelina had not been paying enough attention to her as a mother. Still, once he knew the girl was all right, he asked not to hear any more about her. Michael did not argue. He was already preparing to leave, since he still had to visit the order. He walked out at once, saying nothing and only shutting the door behind him. Adelina set down the tea she had not finished, and went back to the mountain of work covering her desk. Later, a visitor arrived at the Waltz mansion and was brought into the sitting room. As planned, Tijuana Urlaz introduced himself to Julius. Julius then brought in his sister and presented her as Elizabeth. The little girl liked his friend right away, and Tisua stood to greet her properly. He was clearly thrilled when she gave him a sweet little kiss. For the visit, Julius had that famous tea from Beyond served. He figured the familiar flavor would help his guest feel at ease. He had also chosen this place because Tisua spent so much time in the academy garden. While drinking, his classmate thanked him for the thought. Meanwhile, Elizabeth noticed that her brother was taking the meeting very seriously, and he told their guest that his father had given the same tea to their mother because it was good for her health. Tisua agreed, saying studies showed it also helps with fatigue, so the tea should help Adelina, who works too hard and gets worn out. Julius thanked him for it, but Tisua humbly said the credit was not his. While they talked, the little girl spotted something interesting. A jar near the edge of the table caught her eye, and she tried to pull it closer with magic. But something went wrong again. The whole table shook, and the jar crashed to the floor. Julius instantly realized something was wrong with his sister. Then she slumped in her chair, drained as if she had worked all day. Worse, a blue light suddenly appeared on her neck. Tisua saw it and froze in horror. He recognized it as necrosis. Julius looked at his friend for answers, and Tisua explained that it was a disease that drains the body's magic. But the worst part was still to come. People who get it usually die within a few years, and no one has ever been cured. Julius immediately told a maid to call the doctor and send word to his father at the palace. He stayed by his sister's side, helpless and not knowing what else to do. His friend added that records say a person with this disease can live for several years, but judging by Lady Elizabeth's condition, he doubted she could last that long. Normally, people can turn magic into life force, which makes the body less likely to tire out. Necrosis does the opposite. Life force turns into magic. It usually appears in adults, so seeing it in a child is far more frightening. Julius had a knot in his throat, but he still asked to hear everything. The moment Michael learned his daughter was sick, he rushed home at full speed. As soon as he reached the mansion, the butler ran out to meet him. Miguel caught the cape Michael threw at him, shaking with nerves. Then Michael demanded a full report on his daughter's condition. The same doctor from last time had just examined the girl. The butler also apologized for acting without the Duke's approval, but Michael only ordered him to prepare magical contracts for the servants who knew anything. The maid who met him promised to handle it right away. In the children's room, Michael found his anxious son, his equally frightened friend, and the doctor beside the crib. He went straight to the doctor and asked about Elizabeth. She was stable now, though for a short time she had been in critical danger. And all because Julius had ordered a magic restoration potion for her. Michael praised his son, but Julius admitted it had been his friend's idea. The Duke looked at Tisua, who only gave a small shrug. Then Michael demanded a diagnosis for Elizabeth, and the answer hit him hard. The young girl had necrosis, a sickness that burns through magic and eventually leads to death. The potion helped for now, but it could not be given to a baby too often. The doctor had done everything he could, but there were no guarantees. Then Michael declared that no one must learn what happened. He ordered everyone there to sign a magical contract, then turned to Tisua and demanded every detail. The cold edge in his voice was enough to make the boy flinch. Elizabeth stayed in that feverish haze for a long time. She felt awful dizziness and nausea, and everything in front of her seemed to sway. It reminded her of how she used to feel after overworking with documents. In her mind, she was back before that endless stack of papers, rushing to finish before the nobles buried her in even more work. Back then, all she wanted was help, but instead they yelled that she was lazy and had to obey every order because she was only a commoner. No matter how badly they treated her, she refused to lose to those awful people. So Liz kept working until she finally collapsed. All she remembered was her body turning heavy and ice-cold. She felt that same chill now, and more than anything, she did not want to die. A little later, the girl slowly opened her tired eyes. She felt her father's warm hand as he placed a magic stone on her. Leaning over the crib, Michael gently stroked her cheek and told her it was over. His face was full of worry, but also kindness, as he promised that he would save her. Later, after food was brought in, Michael asked Tisua whether his house had studied necrosis. The boy shyly admitted he had only researched it on his own, but Michael thanked him anyway because that knowledge had helped Elizabeth. He did not know how to repay him. Then Julius reminded him that their mother still had not been told about her daughter's illness, even though the timing was critical, so Michael decided he would tell Adelina when the right moment came. Julius, though, was still shocked that his friend knew how to slow the exhaustion. It all came down to magic stones. They were what could slow the disease, and if special stones were needed, finding ones that matched Elizabeth would already be a miracle. Julius quickly asked his father if they had any of those magic stones. Michael said yes, and a large box was brought in at once. When they opened it, both boys were stunned. The chest was packed full of magic stones. Julius could not understand where so many had come from, so he asked his father. Michael explained that when he discovered the magic crystal, His Majesty had given him some fragments. That only shocked the boys more because the stones in the box were anything but small. One of those crystals was already resting in Elizabeth's crib. Its healing effect made the little girl feel much better. Even so, she kept thinking about the disease wrapping around her life. She could not really answer, and only let out a weak sound, as if saying things could be much worse. Strangely, she did not seem very scared of the illness. That even surprised her. She stayed calm, maybe because of her father's care, and she clung to his arm, resting her cheek against it. Then her nanny worried that simply keeping the stone nearby might not be enough. For now it helped, but when the exhaustion got worse, the crystal would need to touch the skin directly. The little girl was more upset about not being able to use magic, since she had wanted to help her brother. Her father told her he had ordered the house to investigate the disease, since their country had no experts who understood it. Elizabeth asked him not to worry, and promised she would find a way to be cured. Suddenly, a voice from the hall told someone not to enter the room. Michael turned toward the door, ready for trouble, but Adelina came in anyway, complaining that no one could keep her out. As part of the Balser family, she had every right to enter. Then she looked at her husband, as if blaming him for hiding this from her. One glance at the girl showed she had come here without even thinking. Adelina looked terrified and hurt at the same time, and even Elizabeth grew frightened. But Adelina herself probably could not explain why she had rushed over and dropped everything. Seeing her shaken, Michael suggested they speak in his office. The nanny told him to send word at once if anything changed. After that, he led his wife away while she still could not say a word. He always watched all this and was desperate to know what her mother was thinking. At the same time, fear hit her. What if that woman's intentions were not good? Michael took his wife to the office where she could finally let out a long, tight breath. When he asked how she was feeling, she admitted she was not all right. Michael urged her not to push herself too hard, since another attack could happen, and reminded her that as Chancellor, Adeline had to focus on her work first. He promised he would handle Elizabeth's situation himself, but Adeline could not accept what she had seen. Necrosis was incredibly rare, and she could not believe her daughter had it. The anger on her face faded, leaving only fear and exhaustion. As a member of a lesser branch of the Waltz family, Adelina had beauty and talent that drew the royal family's attention. But right before her social debut, she was struck by an incurable disease. Not even treatment in a village of the neighboring kingdom could stop death from creeping closer, though magic stones did help her live a little longer. Without magic, Adelina became an outcast in high society. For her, that pain was unbearable, and she began to hate the foolish nobles who cared about nothing but magical power. Then Michael Waltzer stepped in and offered his hand. He was a royal knight, but already famous for major wins and for looking down on useless people, with or without magic. That was when Adelina understood her life could still change, so she took his hand. Later, she passed the palace official exam with the highest score. Even while battling the incurable illness called necrosis, Adelina built a family of her own. She had a husband, a son, and a little daughter. Not long ago, she finally became chancellor, and for a while it felt like everything was working out. But now her legs gave out again. Her daughter had inherited the disease. Adelina blamed herself for not protecting her, while Michael tried to calm her, saying necrosis does not always pass down. He reminded her they had already found a magic stone that matched Elizabeth. Even so, Adelina knew that alone would not save the girl. Michael kept telling her that Elizabeth was strong and the stones would buy them time. He also promised he would find a real cure for his daughter. Adelina could see how much her husband had changed and she wanted to trust him. Meanwhile, the baby drifted back into thought. This kingdom ties magic power directly to noble status. Without the Waltz family backing her, her mother never would have become chancellor. And when a noble gets necrosis, the truth is kept hidden. That was why this mansion used so few servants. Lost in thought, the girl made a few sounds and the nanny rushed over asking if she was hungry or needed changing. Instead, the baby pointed at the magic stone beside her. It had gone gray and dull, so the nanny hurried to the chest for a fresh one. A moment later, Elizabeth had a new source of healing magic, and power spread through her body. The nanny apologized for not replacing the old stone sooner. Then Liz felt a wave of panic. Her father was searching for a cure while she was only buying time, so she decided to do what she could. Since she had been reborn into a real family, she refused to waste that chance. She did not want to die again, especially before she had even learned to walk. Just then, Julius came in and quickly noticed she seemed upset. He told her to stay calm, then shared that Tesua had discovered something. Tesua was right outside and had caught Julius talking to a baby again. Soon, he handed over some papers. He had already given copies to Duke Waltz. They explained that necrosis disrupts the body's magic channels, causing magic exhaustion, and restoring magic is only a temporary fix. What worried Julius most was whether it could ever be cured for good. Looking down, Tesua admitted the research had been stopped for reasons he still did not know. That was why he got interested and started investigating it himself. But no matter how hard he looked, he found nothing that truly worked. In the end, they were stuck with no idea how to cure Elizabeth. Then Liz remembered that House Lass specialized in healing magic, so maybe Tesua could someday discover the cure for necrosis. The baby pushed herself up on the mattress, drawing her brother's eyes. She wanted to shout that if the three of them worked together, they could find the medicine they needed. Julius and Tesua only traded confused looks. All they understood was that she was strong, not what she meant. At dawn that night, a secret mercenary appeared before the first queen. He delivered documents saying the Waltz daughter was sick. Once the job was done, he vanished without a trace. Claudia was certain that if the illness showed up that early, the child had no hope. For her, though, that was very good news. The next day, Julius came up with a way to understand his sister. He brought her a special board with movable symbols, made by a carpenter who worked for House Waltzer. The girl was thrilled by the idea. Julius smiled when he realized how much his sister admired him for it, and she eagerly began moving the symbols. Her first question was why Tesua was studying necrosis. Julius said he had heard House Lass was the one that named the disease. But for some unknown reason, all research on it was shut down. That made Tesua suspicious, so he decided to investigate on his own. Just then, a maid called for the children. Without opening the door, she said Julius's friend had already arrived. He came in without waiting, clearly worried. He had just learned something important and knew Julius would want to hear it. Julius and his sister turned to him at once. Miguel had met with Tesua's father. He was glad the boys were friends, and since the Waltz family bought many of their goods, the whole family was grateful. The Duke told him to skip the formal talk and get to the point. What mattered most now was his daughter's health, so he asked about necrosis. He had heard rumors that there was no illness House Lass could not cure, so he could not understand why they had failed to cure this one. The Duke's stare made it clear he wanted real answers, but the head of House Lass had none. While the adults talked, the children also kept searching for a solution to the problem. Julius sent the maid away, saying he would watch his little sister himself. Once they were alone, Tesua said he had learned why the research was stopped. Two shocked faces turned to him as he declared that necrosis was not a disease at all. It was more like a curse, a kind of dark spell. He admitted it was only a theory, but his family had still chosen to abandon the investigation. Julius could not understand what forced them to stop. He guessed someone powerful had pressured them, and he was right. Tesua had found the former family head's diary in the study. It said the Dodd royal family had taken over the investigation. From that point on, Julius and Elizabeth wanted even more to uncover the truth. Liz remembered the death figures tied to necrosis from her past life. Back then, she thought it was just a very rare disease. But if it was really a curse, then new questions followed. Who cast it, when, and most of all, why? She was only a baby who had harmed no one. Julius noticed her sudden sadness and brought her another magic stone. She thanked him, though her heart still felt heavy. But the moment she took the crystal, magic began to gather in front of her. It flowed out from her body and stretched away in a clear direction. When she saw Julius had not noticed, she reached for him so he would pick her up. Of course, her brother immediately worried she was feeling sick again. Tesua, standing nearby, thought she seemed agitated too, but she pointed at the window, asking to be taken there. Liz realized that if necrosis was a curse, then there had to be a caster behind it. Something told her that if she followed this trail of magic, she might find that source. So she was shocked when it led all the way to the royal palace. Startled by the new suspicion, Liz pushed at her brother and babbled, urging him to carry her to the letterboard. Seeing she had something urgent to say, Julius did not hesitate. She spelled out that the source of the curse might be in the palace, and on the same board she added that they should search for that source together. She also explained that she had to go herself because she could see the magic flowing out of her body. Others could search, but it would take much longer. Julius cared more about her safety and thought the idea was far too dangerous. He was so worried that anger showed in his eyes, which only made his friend tense up again. Then Julius snapped that he would never let her put herself in danger. Michael also learned that the royal family had continued researching necrosis. That news deeply angered him, even though he had not held anything against them before. But House Lass did not specialize in dark magic, so they could not properly study a curse. Now Michael wanted to know who had cast it. The latest clues made him suspect the royal family was involved, and if that was true, then Adelina's illness might also have been a curse. Since she suffered from it first, she may have passed it on to her daughter. Other houses had also been struck by necrosis before, and Michael could hardly believe it. The royal family had not seriously studied the illness, they had simply ignored it. With every thought, Duke Waltzer grew angrier. He knew every curse had an origin, and this one had to have one too. But right now, instead of searching for it, he felt ready to burn the whole kingdom down. It was late, and Julius sat with his sister by the window. Liz still could not believe her brother was being this firm. Still, she understood another attack would only make her condition worse. Very few people can see magic as it really is. There were court mages, but House Walzer would never ask them for help. So Liz decided she could rely only on herself. Julius seemed to read that thought and shouted for her not to even think about it. On top of that, he had no idea how a baby could possibly sneak into the palace. The palace was guarded by the Night Order led by their father, so Elizabeth would never get past them, not even in disguise. In response, she began stacking magic stones, determined to solve this with spells. As Liz gathered the magic stones in her hand, Julius grabbed her again and muttered for her to stop. She clenched the stones tighter and let out a sharp whine, demanding he let go. Right then, the small body went limp, and adult Liz stepped out of it. She told Julius she could still survive if they found and destroyed the source of the curse. One look at her face and voice told him arguing was useless. Liz had made up her mind she would fight this to the very end. Julius could only stare at how stubborn and determined she was. Still, that was exactly how someone from House Walzer should act. And as her older brother, he couldn't just stand by. So they came up with a way past the palace guards. Liz stayed in her adult form, and the two of them put on cloaking robes. When the guards stopped them, they showed special passes and were let through at once. The passes had been a gift from the first queen, though Julius never thought he'd use them like this. Luckily, there were two, and now they were inside the palace. Julius felt like Liz had completely dragged him into this, but she told him to think of it as learning the court as the future head of the house. She guessed he had turned down palace invitations before. After all, their father Miguel held the top military rank as head of the knights, and their mother Adelina as chancellor had plenty of power there too. She also figured Adelina had already told their father that the first queen had taken an interest in Julius. He then told Liz to go home the moment the stones ran out of power. She didn't argue, finding the curse source mattered more. Then suddenly, Liz spotted Miguel talking to an official. She quickly pulled Julius behind a column before her father could notice them. After handing over a document, Miguel moved on. Liz sensed strong magic coming from those papers, and once he was gone, she stepped out and headed straight for the official. Julius whined, having no idea what she was planning now, but Liz insisted she needed to speak to the man. She politely asked if she could see the documents. The second she touched them, a shocking vision hit her. The palace in flames, ruins everywhere, bodies all around. Among the survivors, she saw herself hurt and helpless. She couldn't understand what she was seeing, and standing before her was her father. For a moment, his face twisted with rage, and he wished everyone there dead, every last one of them. The official, thinking she was just a co-worker, explained the papers were an invitation list. After apologizing, Liz went back to Julius. He saw at once how pale she had become and wondered if her mana was gone, but she just didn't know what to do. Why would her own father kill her in the near future? If the vision was real, she would die long before the curse claimed her. For now, she kept this from Julius and urged him to hurry. If their father found them here, it would be a disaster. And if anyone spotted a suspicious woman with the heir of the Dokal house, Michael might kill first and ask questions later. So the siblings kept following the magical trail until they reached the banquet hall, where the guests were already enjoying themselves. The crowd helped them stay hidden as they moved between the tables, but then Julius figured out where the magical flow was coming from. He spotted the first queen in the distance and pointed her out, though they still couldn't be sure the magic was coming from her since many people stood nearby. They watched more carefully, and Julius guessed the source might be the fan. Off to one side, another group was deep in discussion. Among them was King Artur, and Michael pulled him aside to talk. The king agreed, if only because the Duke had approached him for once. Once they were alone, Michael got straight to the point, saying he knew the royal family had information about Nacria. Artur instantly acted clueless, but Michael's cold stare shut him up. The king's fake smile vanished, replaced by clear unease. Michael said Nacria was not a disease but a curse, and the royal family had been investigating it. There was no way he would believe the king knew nothing. Angry now, Artur snapped that if he had known, he wouldn't have sat around doing nothing. He was the complete opposite of his predecessor. The people loved him, especially the poor, and he had the kind of charm that made others want to follow him. House Walzer supported him. Artur backed Adelina's policies and promoted talented people no matter where they came from. That was why no one had truly opposed the second queen entering his life. Now Michael asked for permission to investigate the matter himself. The king did not object, as long as the Duke handled it in his spare time. But that could be too late, and Michael wanted to act now. Artur stayed firm, even though he understood his feelings. Still, he saw no urgency since the number of victims was small. Instead, for some reason, he told Michael to pay attention to his second wife. Michael felt his anger rising and barely kept it under control. Realizing he would get nowhere, he left and headed toward the queen's room. Meanwhile, the children were hiding under a table near the queen when both suddenly felt their father's crushing pressure. They didn't even need to look to know how furious he was. His rage was so strong it shattered some of the glasses nearby. Then he started walking toward the table where they were hiding. Liz knew that if she didn't stop him, her vision might come true today. She was about to come out, but Julia stopped her. She knew that would expose them both, yet the vision scared her even more. She had never seen her father's face filled with such terrifying anger. Then suddenly, a glass shattered nearby. The guests turned, and the king moved to shield the second queen. But the damage didn't stop there. Everyone could feel the duke's rage and pressure. He was furious that Arthur had rejected his request because there were only a few victims. No longer willing to endure it, Michael decided to end this right away. He sent his magic at the king, but a blue-haired girl suddenly stepped in front of him. She took the full hit and somehow survived, though blood spilled from her mouth. For a second, Michael thought he was seeing Adelina. That shock made him stop. As he tried to understand what had happened, the girl began to collapse, and he caught her before she hit the floor. The stunned king finally demanded an explanation. He wanted to know who the girl was, but Michael only told him to stay back. Liz was barely able to stand, yet she was still conscious. As she checked her father and saw his anger easing, she finally relaxed a little too. Julius had stayed under the table the whole time, panicking over his sister. Around them, the women saw the blood dripping from Liz and began screaming, turning the room into chaos. The first queen seemed more upset that the party had been ruined. Then she turned, giving Julius the opening he needed. He used magic to pull away the fan from the girl standing beside her. For the spell to work, there had to be both a launcher and a container. If the container linking the caster and victim was destroyed, the curse might break too. Julius acted at once. When the fan came close enough, he sliced it in half with magic. At that instant, the woman let out a hysterical scream and thick fog spread around her. Then her hair suddenly turned white. Her face wrinkled fast, changing into that of an old woman. A terrible scream filled the hall as her own curse turned back on her. The shocked king demanded answers from the duke, but Michael was stunned too, and ordered the knights to clear out the guests. People, whispering their own guesses, were let out, and now Liz could finally point out the person who had cast the spell. She pointed at the first lady, who covered her face in shame. At that moment, Michael noticed Julius crawling out from under the table. Instead of scolding him, he simply handed over the now disconnected Liz and told him to keep watch on that woman until he came back. Then Michael started off in another direction, but Julius suddenly stopped him and asked what he had been about to do when he entered the hall. Michael looked a little ashamed. He had nearly harmed his own son. Without answering, he just kept walking. Holding Liz in his arms, Julius felt disappointed. He got no reply, but he seemed to understand anyway. The duke then approached the old woman who was being guarded by 3 knights. She started apologizing, trying to say that nothing was what it looked like and that she had been framed. But an unseen force suddenly tightened around her throat, stopping her from speaking. Clutching her neck, she couldn't get out a word, only weak groans. Another knight told Queen Claudia to leave because it was no longer safe. Claudia put on a sad face, as if shocked that someone she trusted was the villain. The woman tried to call out to the queen to say she did it all for her, that she loved her, but the magic on her throat tightened even more, cutting off even her breath. Then the old woman in the fancy dress dropped dead. Michael examined the body and realized a magic seal had been used. Queen Claudia, who had heard everything, hurried to leave as fast as possible. The woman behind the curse survived and was sent for treatment, but her mind was broken. Her family was also stripped down from dukes to barons, just as the first queen strongly demanded. That helped high society praise her as a kind and merciful ruler, and the moment when the duke almost lost his voice was quietly ignored. Still, because she had caused the chaos, she was allowed to lead the investigation. While everyone was distracted, Liz and Julius slipped out of the palace unseen. 3 days later, Liz could safely leave the baby's body again. The girl's magic would slowly return, now that the curse was gone, and Julius was relieved, but he still had no idea how to explain everything to his father. Even so, Liz did not regret stopping him from making a deadly mistake. Sooner or later, they would have to explain who she was and why she was with Julius at the reception. That was even harder because he had used the medals the first queen gave him. Knowing Michael would be furious, Liz kept rehearsing what to say. The moment she felt him coming, she quickly hid inside the little body again. When the door opened, both children froze, expecting to be scolded. Michael's pressure alone made his mood obvious. He had only just returned 3 days after the ball, after dealing with everything at the palace. His expression was still sharp as he demanded an explanation from his son. Fighting back fear, the boy started with the trail of magic that came from Elizabeth and spread through the palace walls. He explained that he could see a faint strip in the air, almost like smoke. With enough focus, he can track magical traces too. Then Julio claimed he asked a palace officer to go with him because he wanted to tell his father right away. It sounded believable, and Michael wanted to trust that his son was telling the truth. Julio insisted he was only worried about his sister. Elizabeth listened so nervously that she started hiccuping. That made the nanny fuss over her and decide the baby must be hungry. But once she picked her up, it was clear Elizabeth also needed a diaper change. Miguel then asked his son for the medals, and Julio admitted they were in his room. He also wanted to know how his father figured out he had been there. The answer was simple. Royal medals carry a personal magic mark. Liz realized those 2 little items had given away their location. Michael then warned his son to be careful about whom he trusts, because he will be held responsible. For safety, the Duke also knew everyone at the dance by face and by name. Julio was honestly shocked, since there had been so many guests, but that was not even his father's only talent. Liz was impressed too. She had a good memory herself, but not like this, especially on such a busy day. Then she noticed just how deeply Julio admired his father. At the same time, she did not miss Michael's stern expression. She was still in the nanny's arms when Michael came closer, and the little girl grew tense as the space between them disappeared. Then she shivered when the Duke reached his hand toward her. Elizabeth braced herself, thinking he might punish her for disobeying him. Instead, he only rested a hand on her head. By checking her temples and neck, Michael confirmed his daughter was feeling much better. Beneath his harsh image, he had truly been worried about her. The little girl understood that and was happy to feel his care. Julio, meanwhile, worried the sickness might come back. Michael corrected him. It was a curse, and the king would officially announce that soon. He added that there was nothing to fear because the same curse could not be cast again. The source had also been destroyed, so the danger was gone. Reassured, Julio asked whether their father had seen their mother at the ball, and if she was doing better too. In truth, Adelina had gone into shock over Elizabeth's condition and suffered an attack. But she was stable now and would also receive Viana's medicine, which should help keep her condition under control. Julio felt hopeful that his mother would recover, especially since she likes Viana's tea. But that was not the last piece of news. Before the next part, Michael's face changed. And it was because, instead of Adelina, who had been in terrible shape, the first queen handled the diplomatic talks this time. Julius was horrified, and little Elizabeth shrank in fear too. Michael also said the second queen panicked because of all that chaos, and His Majesty became so worried about her that he focused on nothing else. Michael did not like that at all. He also blamed himself, because he should have been the one dealing with that problem. Liz, though, was a little surprised. Claudia and Adelina had once been political rivals, yet now, for some reason, Claudia was helping her mother. Liz did not believe it came from kindness. Suddenly, the little girl felt sick and trembled as she curled up against her father. He decided she needed a diaper change right away, even though everything was fine. Later, Michael went to bathe, and both children were with him. Julio helped wash his sister's hair, and their father reminded him not to forget to watch the flow of magic. It was the first time in a long while that Michael suggested they all bathe together. Elizabeth felt a little nervous, though her brother adjusted quickly, but soon he would return to his studies, leaving her in their father's care. Michael was not sure he could manage that since he still had too much work at the palace. He needed to make His Majesty start working at least a little, so they concluded that Adeline would have to look after Elizabeth. Hearing that, the little girl went stiff. She was scared to even imagine how that would end. Not long ago, that woman had openly hated her. The thought of being left alone with Adeline terrified her. Still, after some time, Elizabeth Waltz finally learned to crawl. Everyone was thrilled and even teary because she had grown so much. As she matured, her magic also stopped building up so badly. The curse left no lasting effects, and she could now stay in the mansion without her brother or father. One day, while crawling around again, she felt her father lift her up. Then he handed her to a maid to get the baby ready to go out. Soon she was dressed in a little cape and a funny hat, and somehow it all looked adorable on her. After that, Michael took her outside, where a carriage was waiting. Today they were going to the palace together. During the ride, Michael kept the little girl on his lap. On the way, he told her she would have to live there for a while. Elizabeth was startled, but she could not ask any questions. Since her father said nothing more, she leaned by the window and thought over everything. Her brother had also already left for the academy to make new friends. Then Michael revealed that Adelina would be the one caring for her, and Elizabeth puffed out her lips in a tiny protest. Michael asked his daughter to try getting closer to her mother and promised to visit every day. Even so, Liz had no idea how to get close to a woman who could not even say her name. As if he sensed that, Michael assured her she would understand soon enough. Later, Adelina demanded to know why she was supposed to care for the child at her workplace. Her husband reminded her that he had already stated it in every report, and he handed her a copy he had brought today so she could read it at once. It said that from this day on, Elizabeth Waltz would be under Adelina Waltz's care. Adelina thought her husband was mocking her. First, he only brought the girl around, and now he was leaving her in her care. Michael assured her the child would not be difficult anymore since she had grown. While they talked, Elizabeth showed off her new talent by crawling away. Behind her, a maid kept watch while Adelina continued complaining. Michael promised he would remain at the palace for a while. He also planned to push His Majesty to act more on the Necria issue. After saying his piece, the Duke left his wife with the baby and the nanny, Sophia. Shaken, Adelina asked the maid to prepare tea. The servant went to carry out her order. Meanwhile, Elizabeth played on the floor while her mother returned to her papers. She had a rattle, but it did not hold her attention for long. Instead, she watched Adelina and noticed, as usual, how exhausted she looked. Liz did not understand why Adelina had no secretary or assistant to lighten the load. Then she noticed the maid had brought the same tea Julio drank with Tisua. She did not even need to see the cup. She could feel the magic in the tea leaves. A knock came at the office door, and an official entered with more documents. Seeing the baby there made him forget himself for a moment, but then he explained that some papers needed the Chancellor's signature. Since Adelina was busy, she told him to leave them on the desk. But the official pressed the matter, saying the signatures were urgent even though he could see she was occupied. His rudeness irritated Elizabeth, and she wanted to punish him somehow, but her mother recognized that he was new and had only been in the position for a month. She even knew he had a talented younger sister studying at the academy. The official was openly stunned, unable to understand how Lady Waltz knew that. Adelina explained that she had personally signed his hiring papers and knew his file. Since he worked there, she was expected to know nearly everything about him. Realizing this was no joking matter, the official apologized and left. The little girl was amazed by her mother's memory. Now it was clear that, for better or worse, Adeline was completely fair. She truly believed even commoners could succeed if they had talent. That was why she created a palace hiring system that ignored social rank. Even so, Elizabeth was upset that her mother still had not looked at her, so she used magic to knock a document off the desk. A sheet floated away, and the little girl crawled after it. She wanted to know what was written on it. To save time, she touched the paper, then quickly pulled her hand back. There was a serious mistake in it. The page floated back to Adelina's desk and stopped by her feet. Adelina told the baby to stop playing with her papers without permission. The maid apologized for Elizabeth and warned that she could get ink on herself. The chancellor bent down to pick up the paper and froze when she saw an ink mark right where the mistake was. Out loud, she said the child had pointed out the error, leaving the nanny stunned. But a second later, Sophia lit up, picked Elizabeth up, and called her a genius. She even decided to tell the Duke at once, since he wants updates on every little thing. Even the toys the girl plays with get reported, and Adelina was surprised by how exact Michael was. She went back to work while the nanny kept praising the baby. Adelina only repeated that it doesn't matter if someone is an infant or a commoner. If they have talent, it matters to the kingdom. Liz remembered how, in her past life as a commoner, she became an official through hard work. She owed that chance to Adelina, who had changed the court system. Even so, Liz still didn't get how someone so frail and sick was called a fatal beauty. Adelina was the kind of woman no one could easily read. Soon, Michael knocked and said he had urgent news. Adelina first thought he had come to take the child, but that wasn't it. He stepped closer and handed her a letter from His Majesty. It was an invitation for Adelina and Elizabeth to have tea with the first queen. Adelina worried because she still hadn't fully recovered, so she couldn't go. Michael knew that, so he decided to take his daughter himself. That shocked everyone, even the nanny standing nearby. Tea gatherings can mean many things, depending on the host and the main guest. People trade news, gossip about fashion, and talk about all kinds of things. But it's also a quiet power struggle, a place to see who holds influence and make useful connections. And today, Elizabeth Waltz would make her debut among a group of rather strange noble ladies. Even with her father there, she was still just a baby, so it felt a little odd. Her official nannies, Sarah and Sophia, went along too. Sarah is always nervous around Michael, though she still speaks her mind. Sophia earned his trust by protecting Elizabeth even at the cost of her own life. But the main reason he assigned maids to his daughter was simple. Her mother, Adelina, knows nothing about caring for children. Liz didn't really want to go near the first queen because of what she remembered from her past life. Still, this tea party was a great chance to build new ties. In the palace hall, a lavish tea spread had been prepared, and many guests had arrived. Some whispered that someone from House Waltz would attend. Others talked about Adelina, saying her work as chancellor had ruined her health. That was why the first queen had led the latest diplomatic talks. Everyone saw Claudia as the woman who had truly become a pillar of the kingdom, so some guests could hardly believe the Waltz family had been invited at all. But the queen cares for all her subjects, or at least that's how her mercy looked. The guests worried that some horrible war demon might appear at tea. Many even pitied Adelina for being married to such a cruel man. And when the gossip was at its loudest, Michael Waltz entered the room. Not everyone recognized him, and some started guessing who the handsome man was. He introduced himself and said he had come at the queen's invitation. In his arms was his little daughter, making cute baby noises. The moment they heard his name, the ladies were stunned, but they quickly fixed their manners. Michael tickled her cheek, and she burst into happy laughter. That sight nearly made the ladies lose their composure. Before long, Michael was surrounded by women eager to admire the adorable baby. But he moved on to the queen's table, where Claudia was already waiting, and politely thanked Her Majesty for the invitation. Claudia, however, looked a bit surprised, since she had only invited noble ladies to tea. Michael answered that the invitation never said that. It only said a representative of equal rank could attend without naming any gender. He had used that little loophole perfectly. The queen couldn't argue, so she welcomed him and told everyone to enjoy the gathering. The Duke Waltz bowed politely, and Liz was surprised by how smoothly it worked. Then she spotted a lovely yellow rose and pointed so her father would take it. Understanding at once, he picked it up for her. Elizabeth didn't want it just for herself. She was planning to leave everyone speechless. Holding the flower out, she chirped excitedly, then reached toward one of the ladies as if offering it to her. At that moment, Michael recalled that the woman's wife had once compared her to a flower. The lady had no idea how to respond to such a sweet gift and compliment. Another noblewoman noticed the queen's expression and realized she needed to act too. She stood up, stepped on her own dress, and lurched toward Michael. She nearly fell right onto the baby, who was more worried about the woman getting hurt. The others laughed because such behavior was shameful in front of the queen. But then Elizabeth waved again to show she was perfectly fine, and the ladies were charmed all over again. That was the baby's greatest weapon. She could melt anyone, and winning over powerful people might help save her house in the future. Then one lady asked whether House Waltz had tested Elizabeth's magic level. She thought it must be remarkable, since the girl was born to the commander of the knights and the chancellor. Then, as if casually, she mentioned that Michael's wife suffers from a terrible illness. The baby's bright mood vanished at once. She could also feel her father's grip suddenly tighten with force again. As the woman laughed, she wondered aloud whose charm the child had really inherited. Michael wanted to shut her down at once for daring to speak of his wife that way. Meanwhile, Adelina was, as usual, buried in work. In her hands was that same paper with the error. She still couldn't believe her little daughter had found it so easily. The document listed monster materials meant as a gift for the first queen, and Adelina knew something like that needed very careful review. She also still couldn't believe Michael had actually gone to the tea party, and she hoped with all her heart that it would end without trouble. But trouble had already started, and the Duke demanded an explanation from the rude lady. A dark, crushing pressure spread from him, filling the gossiping noblewoman with fear. She claimed she was only curious, since the girl's hair color didn't seem to match either parent. Michael pulled the child closer, feeling her start to tremble. He coldly told the shameless woman that his daughter clearly resembles his wife. The shape of her nose and the angle of her brows made that obvious. So to him, the question was both improper and insulting. The air turned tense, and the queen had to step in before it got worse. She graciously invited His Excellency to sit with them with his daughter. The baby pushed at the air with her hands, clearly unhappy. The rude lady was even more offended that Her Majesty wanted that barbarian, as she called him, seated beside them. Claudia only gave a small laugh, but it was still her order, so the unhappy woman had to obey. She grew even more uneasy when she felt the Duke's heavy stare on her again. In the end, Michael sat down with his daughter on his lap while the ladies went quiet. Liz remembered that the seats next to the host were meant for important guests, and looking at those women now, she couldn't understand why the queen had chosen them at all. Claudia broke the silence first and suggested they begin the tea. She said she had prepared something special today, a tea gifted by the ambassador of a neighboring kingdom. The ladies immediately noticed its rare color and rich scent. Then that same woman brought up the queen's negotiations, smiling as she praised them a little too sharply, clearly trying to provoke Michael. But he stayed calm. Little Elizabeth, though, would not let that insult pass. This tea had been won through her father's efforts for the kingdom. So she slammed her fist on the table, sending a cake flying high through the air until it landed right on the rude lady's face, even though Liz hadn't aimed. Naturally, everyone started laughing, and even Michael could barely hide a smile. The woman flushed with shame and complained about such improper behavior, but Michael calmly said his daughter had simply wanted her to taste the cake. The queen backed the child too, calling it harmless baby mischief. Angry and humiliated, the lady muttered an apology and left the table to clean up. Then the others laughed openly and even praised the little troublemaker. Her Majesty noticed that Elizabeth looked lively, pointing out how calm and healthy the Duke's daughter seemed. Liz remembered that the princess was studying abroad right now. The second queen had 2 children, but they stayed away from the palace out of respect for the first queen. Claudia seemed truly glad that Michael's daughter was healthy and strong. Michael then admitted that the girl's body had once been affected by a curse, and that the king would announce it later. The guests were horrified by the news, and the queen couldn't understand why he would reveal that here. His reason was simple: they had beaten the illness, and he wanted to share the good fortune of his daughter surviving it. He said it on purpose. If a sorceress had reached the court, then others must have heard rumors too. Claudia stayed quiet, but the Duke kept going. He said His Majesty planned to move fast, and Elizabeth realized her father was using the nobles to pressure the king. Just then, a servant came over. Michael leaned in as the servant whispered in his ear. Right away, he called for the nanny carrying a basket. After placing Elizabeth inside, he stepped away to speak with the man. At that moment, the insulted lady came back and watched the room from a distance. Hatred for the girl filled her at once, and she swore she'd get revenge. Then she spotted a servant carrying tea and got an idea. She waited for the right moment, returned with a smile, and apologized for being away. Then she accidentally bumped into the servant with the tray, sending it crashing. The whole tray and the hot tea flew toward the baby, who was drinking milk. A split second later, the burning tea was about to hit her little face. Michael froze for some reason, but Sarah moved at once to shield the girl. Before it could land, someone else stepped in and used magic to push the tea aside. Adelina arrived in person and demanded an explanation. Elizabeth was stunned. Too much had happened in just seconds. She was still in shock after one scare after another. Michael lost his voice for a moment. The queen hid part of her face behind a fan, and the chancellor angrily demanded answers. The lady behind it all quickly tried to clear herself. Pointing at the servant, she blamed her for the whole thing. The poor maid trembled and could only beg forgiveness for her clumsiness. Even if she told the truth, no one would believe she'd been framed. Only Elizabeth knew the countess had set the maid up. She hated how nobles used commoners to hide their filth, and now even the chancellor seemed to believe the servant was guilty. He declared that an attack like this on the Duke's child deserved death. Elizabeth stiffened. She did not want an innocent girl executed. Then her mother changed the direction of everything. Adelina pointed out that a scene like this at the queen's tea could cause a scandal. Since no one was hurt, Claudia agreed and said the maid would be sent for retraining instead. The maid, already crying so hard her neck was wet, looked up in shock. Then she quickly bowed and thanked His Majesty for mercy. Elizabeth felt proud of her mother for winning over the chancellor and getting support from the most powerful person at the gathering. After that, Adelina went to her husband, who still looked shaken. The others began whispering that the rumors about that family must be true. The murmuring stopped when the chancellor turned to the queen and said she should continue with her duties. Elizabeth felt a little sad that her mother left so soon, but Adelina was already heading for the exit. Watching her hand, the girl realized her rescue had not been luck. At that moment, her mother quietly showed a trace of magic. Elizabeth pinched her father, trying to tell him they needed to follow Adelina, but he didn't get it and only handed her to Sarah to feed her more. He told the queen his daughter wasn't used to events like this and was already tired, so it was time to leave. He headed for the exit with his group, while the angry countess muttered that they were still a pack of savages. The queen coolly said she would pass along her loyalty to His Majesty. Then, glancing aside, she added that it was no longer possible to give the favor the countess wanted, which was clearly very important to her. The countess even asked for an explanation, but the queen simply walked out. Adelina returned to her office, exhausted. A large burn had formed on her arm, the price of using magic to treat it. She started making a special poultice. Truthfully, she had never planned to step into the event. In that place, people with less rank and less magic were expected to endure abuse. Now Adelina even thought her choice had been foolish and that she should have stayed here. She stood behind the door and didn't notice her husband and daughter at the threshold. Both of them realized Adelina was hurt, just as they feared. Under her breath, she murmured happily that her daughter's magic had returned. For Elizabeth, hearing that felt unreal. Then Michael finally knocked and asked to come in. He handed his wife a jar of ointment that works well on cuts and burns. He had been close enough to notice the injury, and she was surprised he had hesitated back there. In truth, the Duke's movement had been blocked by magic. The Chancellor was furious too, but finding the culprit right now would be dangerous. They had to move carefully. Only then did Elizabeth understand why her father had not stepped in. Someone had stopped him on purpose to hurt her. Adelina was still angry that he had meant to leave their daughter there, but he believed the palace was safer at that moment than the estate. He also knew the queen would keep the countess away from her inner circle, and the marquise backing the second queen would likely be dealt with next. In fact, the queen had been trying to bring her husband over to her side, and Elizabeth had helped make that happen. But now they could also keep good ties with the marquise and work together for protection. That would help them at the National Treasures Foundation celebration. Elizabeth suddenly noticed her parents talked more like partners than a married couple. Even so, their bond did not seem as bad as she had thought. Michael was curious how Adelina had moved so fast all of a sudden. Without telling him everything, she only warned him not to underestimate her. Then the Duke got ready to leave since he still had to visit the barracks. He left the baby with the nanny and told his wife to feed their daughter milk when she woke up. After he left, Adelina kept staring at the door like he had asked something impossible. She couldn't understand why Michael was so attentive now when he had never been this gentle even with Julius. No one would expect a tyrant to care for a baby so tenderly. After her brief days passed, Adelina remembered the milk. She went straight to the table, poured water into a pot, and added a large amount of powdered formula. Since she had no milk of her own, she had to boil the formula. But while she worked, the nanny looked horrified and begged to handle it herself. Not long after, in another part of the castle, blood and bodies covered the floor. Duke Walser arrived with his men and immediately took control. Another door stood ahead of him, and that was where he was trying to get. Before leaving, he ordered his men to clean everything up. The next morning, Julius came to see Elizabeth. Even knowing the curse no longer threatened her, he still worried about her well-being. He was so happy to see his little sister that his bright smile almost blinded her. He had skipped classes today because the king ordered Elizabeth's magic level checked, and Julius supported it. He wanted proof the curse had left no trace. He also planned to stay with his sister today, since their mother was in a meeting and their father was busy with his men. The nanny had no idea the baby understood everything, so to her it sounded like the children were having a real conversation. Julius said that a genius lived inside that tiny body, which is why Elizabeth understood it all. Elizabeth thought calling her a genius was a bit much. Still, from now on they would likely speak to her that way. Later, Pendragon, the head of the court magicians, arrived. His job was to measure Lady Elizabeth Walser's magic. Julius politely introduced himself by name and title. He wanted Liz to introduce herself too, but all she could manage was a long baby sound. She was curious, since in her past life she had barely any magic. Children born with strong power were treated well and quickly taken in by good families, while Liz had to learn control all by herself. Even then, she only had enough power for tiny tasks like making a small breeze to dry ink faster. People still looked down on commoners no matter their skill. Now Liz had been reborn as the daughter of a ducal house, and the control she learned before might finally help. Deep down though, she prayed the curse had not left even a drop behind. The old magician soon noticed that the child was full of energy and that her magic reserve was huge. His expression changed for a moment, almost like he could see through her. That look scared Elizabeth. It felt like he was seeing all the magic inside her body. What worried her even more was the thought that he might see her grown soul. Julius, meanwhile, wondered why the great magician had come for something so small. But this was part of his duty. Children were treasures and the kingdom's future. The magician asked Elizabeth to place her hand on a small sheet. She feared he might uncover her biggest secret, but Julius told her not to worry, so she agreed. The moment she touched it, a bright golden light burst out and pushed her hair back. Then across the whole room, magic symbols appeared like a hologram. Everyone saw them, not just Liz. Julius froze, and even the old magician was deeply shocked. That glow meant Elizabeth had the potential to become the strongest sorceress in the kingdom. She had expected something like that, but Julius was already eager to tell their father. He praised his sister's talent, though the magician wasn't done yet. Duke Walser and his son both have a huge store of inner magic, but young Elizabeth possessed an outer kind, the old man found unusual. Julius got upset at once, not understanding what the magician meant. The old man assured him he meant no harm, he was only curious what kind of magic her mother had. Magic is split into two kinds, inner magic, which affects the body, and outer magic, which affects the world around us. Liz knew her magic was strong for a noble, but now she could not figure out why Pendragon cared so much about her type of power. He guessed it might be tied to Liz's soul affecting Elizabeth. Before he could think further, her father lifted her up and proudly declared she was without question Waltz's daughter. Then he demanded the old magician explain why he had doubted it. Liz was so happy in her father's arms that she hugged him tight. Then Julius cut in, asking why their father had not gone with the men. Before leaving, they had found the carriage wheel broken. Of course, Michael left out that he had broken it himself on purpose. He did it to delay the trip until tomorrow, so he could stay for the test today. Now he was pleased, but the weight of his stare put heavy pressure on the court magician. Michael again demanded proof that Elizabeth looked just like Adelina. The old man smiled, saying he had not seen Adelina's face in a long time. She had always been the top student at the academy, and he had been proud of her until Necria struck her down. The children, who knew nothing about their mother's curse, were horrified. Michael looked ready to rip out the magician's tongue for revealing that secret without permission, but since Adelina's condition was not a disease in the usual sense, the old man thought he could say it. Still, the main point was, with a child this gifted in magic and parents this exceptional, a marriage into the royal family would be truly grand. Michael hated that idea at once, and one look from him told Pendragon he had spoken too soon. So the magician quickly added that as long as Lady Adelina remained chancellor, such a marriage was unlikely. Walser only warned him never to bring it up again. Meanwhile, Queen Claudia met with King Arthur. She was fairly pleased that His Majesty had invited her for tea. All she had heard was that a magician had gone to the Walsers to check Elizabeth's magic level. She had also heard rumors that the first queen had ordered it. In her defense, Claudia said the child was ill and the king corrected her. It was a curse. Then he asked Her Majesty not to interfere and said he would handle it himself. Claudia did not argue and quietly kept eating her cake. Then Arthur suddenly stood up, clearly ready to leave instead of staying for tea. He had no reason to remain with the first queen any longer. In fact, while he was there, he had not touched the dessert or even the tea. The queen decided the dessert must not have been sweet enough, which was why he refused it. She did not like the lemon cakes either, so she told the maid nearby to serve something sweeter next time. Meanwhile, the court magician was getting ready to leave. Once the Walsers were alone, Julius admitted he had a request. Since they had started talking about choosing a future partner for little Elizabeth, he said every possible candidate had to be judged with great care. Michael fully agreed and said he would only approve someone who could beat him in a fair fight. Liz listened in shock. They were getting way ahead of themselves. Even the nanny, Sophia, thought that if this kept up, the young lady might never marry at all. After that, Julius said he wanted to ask about his mother, and his father agreed it was time to tell his son the whole truth. Adelina had been affected by necrosis, just like Elizabeth. Lady Walser was working as usual, but then she set her pen down. A cup of special tea sat beside her, still warm. Leaning back in her chair, Adelina decided to take a few minutes for herself and drink it. She had always feared the Necria curse might be passed down, even though doctors said otherwise, because there were too few cases to be sure. Julius took after Michael with the same red hair and strong will. He was the perfect heir, and Adelina often visited him between tasks. But the daughter she had given birth to stirred very different feelings. Adelina, once the best at the academy and cherished by her family, had lived without worry, and her hair had always looked like young Elizabeth's. Seeing the girl's body filled Adelina with fear that she too would die in bed. She also feared Elizabeth might grow into a mage as gifted as she once was. And then out of jealousy, Adelina would come to hate her own daughter. She had once been abandoned by her parents, and now she was doing the same. After falling under a curse that slowly steals life, Adelina survived only by giving up her magic. That was when Duke Walser offered to judge her skills and talents. On that day, Adelina found a real family, but since then, everything had changed. Mikhail was now in the office with the children. While a servant poured tea, he explained that some nobles turned magic into life force to survive. The result was survival at the cost of losing the ability to use magic, and afterward they were cast out. Something similar happened to Adelina. She was supposed to be expelled too, but she managed to create a talent recruitment policy. After marrying, she regained her noble title, while the family that had rejected her was destroyed by Mikhail because they only valued magic and ignored her real talent. Adelina's attacks were caused by a lack of magic, and the best natural way to build it back up was through food. That made Liz realize she needed to eat more to recover her magic faster. Julius, remembering Tisua, promised to ask for anything suitable if he found it. Just then a servant came in, but the nanny stopped him, saying the Waltz family was talking. Then she told Mikhail his wife had arrived, and he ordered them to let her in and escort her properly. Adelina entered calmly with a faint smile, holding some documents. First, she asked how Elizabeth's magic test had gone, and Mikhail openly said the court magician was convinced of their daughter's talent. Hearing that, Adelina's expression shifted slightly, though she tried not to show it. Julius noticed, but thought his mother had simply felt unwell. Liz looked at her with gratitude, since her help had made everything work out before. Still, the little girl could not understand why a woman like this was called a villain. In her past life, Liz had also been looked down on for lacking magic, and now she understood her mother had gone through the same pain. Even so, one question remained: why didn't the chancellor hire an assistant? While Liz fidgeted over that thought, Julius assumed she wanted to crawl around a bit, so he set her down on the carpet and she quickly started scratching forward with her tiny limbs. She crawled over to Adelina, grabbed her skirt, and tugged for attention. Even Mikhail was shocked by how oddly his daughter was acting, but Liz badly wanted to tell her mother she deserved better treatment. She pushed herself so hard that for the first time in her life she managed to say a word. The whole room fell silent, as if a miracle had dropped from the sky. Liz had actually meant to say this was crazy, but what came out was something else. She tried again while the family stared at her in total amazement. Adelina was the most shaken of all. She could not believe the child had called her mom. Julius was thrilled because it was his little sister's first word. Either way, Adelina now looked at her daughter differently. She even picked the little girl up, and Liz realized her mother had liked it. Even if that was not what she had meant to say, it no longer mattered. Then, everyone noticed Mikhail moving closer like he was under a spell, while his son tried to stop him. The Duke's aura had flared up out of nowhere, almost like jealousy. Elizabeth stared at him, confused by that look. Then he threw down all the documents his wife had brought, dropped to his knees on the spot, and lowered his head. Adelina only smiled. If someone had told her this before, she never would have believed it. While their father stayed frozen in awe, Julius gathered the scattered papers. On them, Lise noticed talk of the kingdom's founding festival. She realized all the chaos had made her forget about that celebration. Then her father suddenly shouted, begging her to say something else. Julius got so startled that he told his sister she had to learn to talk soon for their father's sake. Soon after, it was officially declared by His Majesty that Naobi was a curse, not a disease. Still, much remained unclear and needed deeper investigation. Maobi suspected someone in the palace, while Julius focused on the school, especially the nobles' children, and planned to gather information. Maobi also kept moving between the manor and the palace as he prepared for the festival. Whenever he came back, he hugged his daughter and squeezed her very, very tightly. Elizabeth stayed under her mother's watch in the office, and she decided she would never let anyone speak badly about Adelina. Most important of all, Elizabeth had finally learned to stand on her own. It did not last long. She dropped right back down a second later, but she believed she would soon be taking steady steps by herself. And while she crawled around the office, Adelina kept glancing at her. She still found it strange that Elizabeth had called her mom. Then Liz tried to learn how to say brother and father, but only managed sounds like bra and auto. Adelina noticed, and Sophia explained that every baby syllable carries some deep hidden meaning. She added that it was also a good sign the young lady was healthy and full of energy. Michael had other concerns. During the festival, he was in charge of the kingdom's security, and today he had received a visit from Marquis Karl Grants, whom he had specially summoned. They had not seen each other in a long time, and the Marquis was surprised by how urgent the call had been. He also did not understand why everyone saw the Duke as a tyrant. After all, his wife described Walser as a very kind man. The Marquis had sworn loyalty to the current king himself, so he would not be easily fooled. Still, he was ready to see that supposed tyrant in person, and Michael began explaining how the festival's security would be adjusted a little. This year, people say the Marquis has ties to mercenary and adventurer guilds, so he was put in charge of that area. The Duke will also give him temporary authority outside the palace. The Marquis thought it sounded crazy, like Michael was joking, but orders were sent to the head court mage to make sure everything was fully ready. All of this is because the king will show the national treasure to the public this year. Grants promised to make a plan fast and give it to the Duke for review. He was already sure Michael was not the man people claimed he was, whether he was kind or not. At the end, Walser asked the Marquis to do this for his wife. He agreed, thinking someone like that could become a strong ally. Tyrant or not, it did not matter to him as long as Michael did not stand against the king. Later, Liz talked with Julius through the pipe. She happily said she had learned to say big brother. Julius told her Papa should come first, but that word felt much harder. Even so, she promised to try. Julius also heard that their father had met with the Marquis at the palace, since he was helping handle security for the celebration. Liz remembered from the notes that magical creatures attacked during the founding festival, and Michael did not get called a tyrant for no reason. Duke Walser handled the monsters well during that attack, but by bad luck, someone from the royal family was hurt. That incident led to the fall of House Walser. The founding celebration happens every 5 years, and it is the kingdom's biggest event, where the royal family shows its power and displays the national treasure. If the royal family is harmed again like before, then Michael, as commander of the knights, will take the blame. After that, House Walser could collapse. Memories of her past life would not leave Liz alone. She stayed in her mother's office under the care of 2 maids, but still decided to act and stop the tragedy. She tried to sneak away, though there was one problem: she still could not walk. Even so, she grabbed a stool, and the maids cried out when they saw her standing. Adelina turned at the noise and could hardly believe it. Hearing the commotion, Michael rushed in at once, nearly breaking the door as he asked what happened. His sudden shout scared Elizabeth, and she lost her balance and fell again. Sarah quickly explained that the girl had been standing while holding the stool. Michael looked ready to cry over missing such a moment by seconds. After that, he kept watching her, hoping she would do it again. While they talked, Adelina mentioned rumors that the magic crystal he gifted would be shown at the festival. Michael explained that palace guards were his duty, while the Marquis would handle the capital. Since the Marquis has wide connections, Michael felt sure he could handle it. Adeline was feeling better now and wanted to help prepare for the festival too. The Duke agreed, then asked to see the documents. He also had to go meet His Majesty, even though he did not want to, because he might miss the happy moment when his daughter stood up again. Adeline had suffered badly from necria before, but once her treatment changed to curse cleansing, she started to recover. It seemed that eating food with magic in it slowly restored her health. Then Elizabeth got an idea to help her father's work. Her mother served as chancellor and was very active in that role, so if magical creatures attacked, the 2 of them could face it together. Liz began babbling to get her mother's attention, but Adeline had no desire to deal with the child and hoped she would quiet down. When that failed, she finally lifted the baby onto her lap. Liz spotted a paper on the desk that mentioned the chief mage of the court. It laid out a plan to strengthen the palace barriers and block outside threats. Past her mother, Liz also noticed 2 people through the window. One was a Marquis talking with an official. Right away, a plan formed in her little head, and she started asking to go outside. Of course, all she really did was wave her arms and kick, so Adelina did not understand. Then the nanny arrived to take her for a walk in the garden. The chancellor only warned them not to leave the inner yard. Soon, Sophia spread a mat on the grass for Elizabeth, and the girl was pleased. Here, she wanted to use a little magic, and hoped no one would notice. She bent down, pressed her palm near her ear, and made a magic listening spell. With it, she tried to hear what the Marquis was saying to the official. Grants ordered a letter delivered, since he would dine at the palace that night. Duke Walser had personally promised to invite him for venison, his favorite dish. Liz found that strange. There had to be a special reason to treat a marquise like that. That made her wonder if her father and Grants were really that close. After all, the only clear thing linking them was that neither belonged to the First Queen's faction. The official also wanted to know what had caused all these changes in security. Part of it was because the Chancellor had pulled some conservatives to her side. The official was shocked that the Marquess would listen to a woman without magic, but Grants cut him off and warned him to watch his mouth. Walls have ears. The conservatives had backed Adelina after that tea gathering with her husband and daughter, and Liz realized things had changed. In the past, those conservatives supported the Queen. The Marquise went on about the tea ceremony hosted by the First Queen, and mocked it, saying only a tyrant would storm in and leave such a lasting mark. Elizabeth started piecing the details together. Her father had already begun walking a different path from the one in her past life. Before, House Walser relied on its huge military strength and looked down on noble social events. In this life, their ties with hostile nobles had not cracked yet. Still, for some reason, Liz felt deeply uneasy. Soon the day of the celebration arrived, and Julius went with his sister to the Crystal Palace, while their parents prepared for the National Treasure display. Julio told his sister to behave, which she could not exactly promise. He also wanted to know if magical creatures would really attack. Liz could not be sure anymore, but staying alert was still the smart choice. At the Crystal Palace, the National Treasure would be shown for 2 days. Before the public entered, the king invited the nobles to a preview. In her past life, Liz knew that treasure was a magic crystal, the very thing tied to her absurd death. But when Necria made her suffer, pieces of that same crystal had saved her life. The irony was strange, but she had more urgent things to think about now. Many people stared at them, especially Julius because he looked so much like his father. Some even feared he had inherited the same nasty temper. Then everyone noticed little Elizabeth's bright smile. The noblewomen fell for her instantly. She tugged Julius's tie so he would smile too. He complained and told her to use the pie, so she pulled at her cheeks with her fingers to show what she meant. Julius copied her right away and liked it himself. Now the crowd adored not just the little girl, but him too. No one could believe a so-called tyrant's son could be that cute. Then Liz noticed 2 knights talking nearby, and she used magic again to listen in. They were discussing unrest in the capital that the Marquis had quickly put down. The second knight said he would report to the commander at once. Liz remembered that in the past, while her father protected the city, he failed to focus on the palace. But with the Marquis involved now, the chances of a magical creature attack should be lower. Soon trumpets sounded to open the celebration. The royal family stood on the platform while Adelina and Michael were placed on the steps below. It was announced that, for the kingdom's foundation day, the national treasure would be presented, an heirloom passed down through the kingdom of Elzadai. Then an attendant pulled away the large covering, and everyone gasped. Before them stood a huge dark pink magic crystal. Its beauty won praise from the whole crowd at once. Now Julio could finally see what his father had once managed to obtain. But in the last life, that crystal had been found much later. And maybe because Michael got it sooner this time, Elizabeth survived. Still, she was just glad she would never have to watch that again. Then she noticed magic flowing from the crystal, and what scared her was that it felt exactly like the cursed magic inside her. She could not tell where it was heading from here, so she needed to get closer. Julius thought they should warn their father right away. When they reached the platform, a gentleman asked them to wait while he reported it. The children moved off to wait in the gazebo instead. At that point, it felt like their father had made security so tight they could not get near him, so all they could do was wait. Liz thought back to the notes from her past life. Because of what she had changed, she no longer knew what would happen next. Then she spotted that same heavy woman who had once shoved the maid carrying hot tea. But it was not the woman herself that mattered, it was the strange bracelet she wore. Elizabeth could now tell for sure that the crystal's magic was flowing into that bracelet. Both children stared at it, and even Julius noticed it seemed to tremble. Then everything went wrong. The crystal at the center began shooting sparks and the bracelet exploded on the Countess's hand. And this was no small accident. They barely had time to understand what was happening. A chilling howl rang out, and Liz remembered the notes about wolf-like monsters. Now those creatures appeared before everyone, like jackals with deer horns. They came out of nowhere, more than a dozen of them, and they were enormous. The gentlemen got ready to fight, but even they were clearly afraid. These beasts were known as some of the deadliest ones, though the gentlemen were highly trained. Then an even bigger wolf appeared, with deer horns. Its roar shook the air and its huge claws tore into the ground. Julius grabbed a candelabrum from nearby and started driving the monster back. Liz was impressed by how he fought, but her main concern was finding their father fast. She remembered that the royal family suffered the most in the monster attack, and sure enough, the wolves rushed toward the king and the second queen. Liz chose to use her magic to face the beast. Still, she wasn't sure she could do it, so she tried to help however she could. A blade stopped a huge monster with long fangs. Duke Waltz trapped it and forced it back. One sharp move only made the creature more vicious, and it lunged harder at the man blocking its way. Once again, the sword jammed between the beast's fangs. Michael tried to rip some teeth out, but the grip was so tight it was hard even to free the blade. Even so, the knight captain managed to wound the monster again. He followed with more magic strikes from above, giving it no time to react. The children could only stare as their father crushed the monster. Then the knights arrived and attacked it from every side. Only the finishing blow remained, and Julio pulled his sister against him so she wouldn't see the ugly end. After the monster died, both children praised their father for getting there in time. He first made sure His Majesty and the Queen were unharmed, then ordered the knights not to let a single creature escape. His command to kill every monster rang across the area. Meanwhile, Liz noticed that fat lady limping away, clearly trying to hide. She told her brother, and he agreed they couldn't let the suspect get away. The two followed her at once, luckily without running into more monsters. Julius quickly realized the woman was surprisingly fast for her size. Elizabeth also couldn't use magic yet with so many people nearby, and the lady ran straight through the bushes. Julius stayed close to his sister and nearly caught up, but when they reached the bushes, they heard a strange sound, like a cut-off scream. At that moment, someone grabbed the lady from behind and covered her mouth. Soon after, the celebration grounds were littered with dead monster wolves. From a distance, it was almost impressive watching Michael tear through them one after another. Any monster that tried to flee was pinned down by magic and then cut clean in half. In that short time, Michael had already turned himself into a monster blood-covered force that wouldn't let anything escape. When things finally settled, they reported that no more monsters had been found. It was good news, but he still ordered the perimeter checked again. The people who saw it were horrified, but now they understood why he was called the Devil of War. Then a lady with a thick braid noticed something. Beside the body of a giant monster, a small one was crouching on the ground. It was clearly the dead beast's offspring, and she reached toward it, but blood suddenly splashed onto her face, and she froze in fear. In an instant, Michael had run the pup through with his sword. After that, he pulled a tablecloth from a nearby table and calmly wiped the blade. The lady fainted, and the man holding her asked the commander to be a little more careful, but Michael saw no point in that. A true gentleman should know his priorities. Even so, others criticized him, saying it was only a baby and killing it was too much. Then Adelina stepped in and reminded them that monsters grow fast. If the pup escaped, it would likely return to the capital soon, and innocent people could die. One man was outraged that the chancellor spoke so boldly despite having no magic. But a moment later, the duke's stare nearly crushed him for speaking out of turn. He felt a chill run down his spine, like his legs might give out. Then the king stepped in and said the commander had done his duty well. His Majesty was more concerned with how these creatures got into the palace. Michael still couldn't answer because security came first. Then the first queen beside him spoke up, criticizing the whole situation. During a ceremony tied to the royal family's honor, monsters had attacked. That cast doubt on the royal family's responsibility and its bond with the people. Now the first queen wanted to hear Michael Walser's view as well. As both royalty and commander of the knights, he was one of those responsible for the guard. Adelina looked at Claudia with open disdain, not understanding what game she was playing. Around them, people started whispering that monsters had entered the noble's own space, and the murmuring grew louder. Tired of the noise, the king ordered silence. He told the queen this was not the time or place to hunt for blame, and Walser was not the only one responsible for security at the party. The king's own name stood beside the commanders in that duty, so his majesty admitted everyone had been endangered by his own mistakes too. But as king, he swore to the people that he would find whoever caused this incident. It was then suggested that the guests be moved to the guest rooms until everything was sorted out. People whispered that it was the right choice and that they were lucky to have him leading. Only the first queen still looked unhappy. Clearly, her own plan had failed. Adelina noticed something off in her behavior, but she had no proof yet. Meanwhile, the children watching the countess saw that the stranger's hand looked like a wolf's head. This man was standing right behind her. When the child asked who he was, he said nothing, and only pressed harder over the woman's mouth. Liz quietly warned her brother that strange magic was wrapped around his hand. Suddenly, the countess knocked his hand aside and screamed for help. Liz realized the lady had only been a front, bringing in the monsters through the bracelet stone. And now this stranger had shown up to silence the only suspect. As if he knew he was about to be caught, he tried to finish her off quickly, but Liz refused to let that happen and used magic to stop him. A thin stream of energy caught the villain by his wolf-like arm. Julio worried someone would notice what his sister was doing and that they'd both get in trouble. Even so, he quietly asked her to teach him that trick someday. Right now, the only thing that mattered was stopping the villain from escaping while he still strangled his accomplice with his human hand. Liz kept holding him back with magic, trying her best not to make it obvious. By then, guards were already coming after hearing the noise. The moment the villain heard their steps, he vanished like he had never been there. The terrified countess dropped to her knees, and Julius sat beside her as if shielding her. Seeing the duke's son and daughter there, the gentleman quickly asked if they were hurt. They were fine, but they needed to tell their father something important. When Liz saw the dark mark on the woman's hand, she realized the bracelet absorbed magic, and she was sure it was tied to the man in the black cape. The children told the gentleman that the woman had a suspicious magical artifact on her hand. Of course, she instantly started making excuses, but Julius never directly said she was the one behind the crime. Even so, one question remained: why had that suspicious man in black attacked her? Julius ordered the guards to take her away, saying their father would deal with it later. As they led her off, the woman kept screaming that she was being framed and was innocent. A little later, while the king was busy handling the aftermath, the first queen came to see him without even asking to enter. The maids tried to stop her, but she slipped past them and went straight in. The king did not want to speak with her because he had too much work. Still, Claudia was part of the royal family and had come to state her opinion. She said she was worried about the safety of such an important ceremony, but Arthur answered that he would handle it himself. The event had been postponed, and as ruler of the country, that was his responsibility. Faced with that, the first queen had nothing to argue, so she apologized for the interruption and hurried to leave. The moment she turned away, Arthur quickly mentioned that countess from her circle. He added that the woman's family was now under Commander Balser's protection. The king already knew the queen's subject had been attacked by a man in black. Claudia let out a heavy sigh, acting as if she truly pitied the countess and thanked his majesty and the duke for looking after her people. Archer did not hide that he was also working as a court magician, and the reason for the attack would soon be uncovered. At that, the queen smiled as if that were good news. Julius, Elizabeth, and the nanny stood in their father's office, looking so messy they almost seemed guilty. Miguel demanded to know how they had ended up in the garden during the attack on Countess Martha Goritz. He was upset that the children had slipped past their guards and worse, put themselves in danger on such a terrible day while the guests were being evacuated. Then his son Michael said that a fool who runs into trouble cannot become the future head of the house. The little girl wanted to apologize and admit it was all her fault, but only broken sounds came out. The boy dropped to his knees before his father and begged forgiveness for his carelessness. He admitted he had endangered both himself and his sister, and said he was ready to accept any punishment. Still, Julius doesn't think following the countess was the wrong choice. That's exactly why Michael called him a fool. Julius has to remember who he is, ask his mother to forgive him, and learn that courage can easily turn into recklessness. Those fatherly words eased both Julius and his little sister. Then the Duke remembered Julius had said he would accept any punishment. Michael did plan to punish him, but only because he cared. After the monster attack, the panic died down thanks to the king's speech the next day. He raised one key question. Was the attack connected to someone at the ceremony? So he told every guest to stay and help find the culprit. Archer believed that, working together, they could make the criminal pay. This plan was put together by Chancellor Adelina, and Michael, with help from the court magician, quickly handled the aftermath. After that, the kingdom's founding celebration went on as normal. Meanwhile, the other noble children kept enjoying the party. Elizabeth and Julius, though, were confined to their palace rooms. It was the punishment their father gave them, and now they had to accept it with dignity. Michael usually forgave them in the end, but this time he was truly angry. That was what finally made Liz and her brother understand their mistake. More than anything, their mother was deeply shaken, desperate to see the daughter she had once struggled to face. Julius had never seen her this upset, and Liz felt guilty too. Lately, Adeline had become much gentler with her, so Liz never expected her to learn about the meeting with the man in black. All Adeline did was pull them close and cry. Liz understood her mother's fear and secretly liked being held that way. Later, in his room, Julius reminded her who their parents were. That meant they could not keep taking risks or making them worry, especially their mother. Liz agreed, then went back to checking the papers and found another mistake. She shouted so loudly that someone heard her through the door. Right then, Adelina rushed in, worried about the children. Julius quickly assured her Liz was fine and even showed her, but Adelina and Michael, who came in behind her, had much worse news. The countess had died. The court magicians found the cause: magic poisoning. It happened when the crystal's power burst out. What made it strange was that Elizabeth had reacted very differently to those crystals. They had helped her instead, which meant the crystal did not affect everyone the same way. The children quickly said they never touched the jar and had not been harmed. Even the men who grabbed the countess were unharmed, which eased their parents a little. To lighten the mood, they asked for something sweet to be brought in. Then Miguel asked his son about the bracelet that stored magic. Since Julius had seen the magic move, he was sure the crystal was to blame. Elizabeth wasn't fully convinced he could have noticed that in all the chaos. Still, they knew the countess got the bracelet from someone inside the palace, and every magical item brought to the event had been registered. Only Michael, his majesty, and the court's head magician knew the full list. So how did the Duke know someone had likely tricked Countess Martha? After the incident, the Goritz family lost its title, but they were not executed because the true criminal was the one who gave Martha the bracelet. Liz worried about that since no one could pull this off alone in a palace guarded that well. Then a maid came in and announced the meal was ready. Realizing it was time for a family lunch, the little girl cheered up at once. The table wasn't packed with food, but everything served was tasty, healthy, and filling. During the meal, Adelina suddenly asked if the girl had started eating anything besides milk. She had little by little she was trying fruit purees, and every pleased sigh she made with each spoonful seemed to delight the Duke. Still, Elizabeth was bothered that her mother didn't call her daughter, or even by name. Julius noticed a sandwich on the table and offered her a bite, but she waved her hands to show it was too soon. She meant to say Pampushka, but what came out was Papa. The Duke froze in joy, then scooped her up and spun around in excitement. He spun so much he got dizzy and ended up throwing up. Adelina panicked, Michael looked embarrassed, and Julius could only let out a long sigh. At the same time, the first queen sat alone in her room. Beside her was a bracelet just like the countess's, and she was pleased that the experiment had worked. Now Claudia could use the magic crystal's power whenever she wanted. Then the hidden servant appeared again and handed her an envelope. After reading the short note, the queen tossed it straight into the fire. It told her that her father wanted war, but she still had unfinished business in this kingdom, so Claudia ordered the servant to say her return would be delayed. She meant to see this through because she had made a promise. As more time passed, little Elizabeth slowly learned how to walk. She was still clumsy, but with magic she could even fly. Even so, she worked hard to walk on her own like everyone else. She also started saying more words, mostly talking with her brother. Since the academy was on break, he stayed home, while their parents could only visit the estate every few days because of work. For the past few months, Michael had been studying the bracelet that summoned the monsters. The court magicians helped with that, and the number of people allowed to bring magical items into the palace was reduced. But sadly, they still hadn't found the real culprit. The Duke came home earlier than expected, which made the children very happy. Whenever he held the baby, he wanted to know what new things she had learned. This time, he also brought several chests filled with magic stones. Julius was surprised, since the curse had already lifted, but the Duke feared he might still suffer a physical collapse like Adelina once did. Even though people called it a curse, they still had no new answers. Liz understood he might end up with a long-term magic shortage like his mother, maybe because in his past life he had no magical power at all. At lunch, Miguel told Julius to contact him through his palisade if needed. Julius asked if there was something he could do while watching his sister, and his father suggested visiting an orphanage near the palace. Not long ago, the children had suggested donating old books there, and Adelina had been impressed. Julius had decided to hear his sister's opinion when they visited the academy together. He thought it was silly to throw away books that could still help someone. Elizabeth listened happily when he and her brother came up with another idea. They would deliver the books to the orphanage themselves and take Elizabeth along. Julius said she also needed physical activity and the area was safe. Miguel agreed but told them to bring guards for the trip. Julius thanked his father while Liz fell into thought, remembering how much time she herself had once spent in an orphanage. Soon, a carriage was prepared, and the children set out. Of course, they didn't go alone. Their attendants came with them. Liz was a little nervous, but all they were doing was delivering books. When they arrived, Julius asked the guards and nannies to wait outside, promising they'd be back soon. Then he carried his little sister inside and walked through the garden. He still wore that flashy lady's hat, but right now his focus was on her. He knew that in her past life she had spent a long time in an orphanage. That was why he thought it would help her understand what those children really needed. Soon, they reached the building where the orphaned children lived. A plainly dressed woman came out to greet them. Julius quickly asked her to skip the formalities since they had brought books. He also requested a tour because he wanted to make more donations later. She was grateful, but worried this wasn't a place for nobles. Still, the boy insisted, and she finally agreed to guide them. They moved through an old hallway. The children weren't there because it was lunchtime and they were all in the dining room. Julius asked to see them and promised not to stay long. Liz was glad, since nobles rarely cared about orphanages. In the dining room, several thin, pale children sat at the tables. Shaken by what he saw, Julius asked if any child there was his sister's age. The woman said no, everyone living in the shelter was already there. Liz realized that by her old timeline, she should have been born already, and this was the very orphanage where she had grown up in her past life. She even remembered that woman worrying about her. If Liz wasn't here now, then maybe no one had brought her in yet. Back then, she should have arrived the same year Adelina became chancellor. So Julius said they should ask his father about it once they got home. For some reason, that mattered a lot to the girl, and she felt relieved. Then they headed back outside, where the servants were still waiting. Julius stepped toward the carriage with his sister in his arms, but she noticed a stationery shop sign. From her little sounds, he realized she wanted to go inside. He had actually been thinking of buying stationery too, so he agreed and headed for the store. Julius asked the servants to wait a bit longer. The nanny said they could bring anything he needed, but he wanted to shop himself. The store had all kinds of supplies. There were books, ink, and quills. Elizabeth looked around with bright eyes, checking out nearly every little item. Everything here was fancy. In her past life, Liz used to cry because she could never afford things like this. Now, as part of House Balser, she could finally buy something too. Behind the counter, a clerk waited for customers when Julius spotted a beautiful quill on a shelf. It stood out from the rest, its soft plumes almost glowing gold. Elizabeth leaned from her elephant to see what he meant. She thought the pen was just as lovely as her father. The two of them quickly decided it would make a perfect gift, especially since Michael worked so much that his quills often snapped. While they were thinking it over, a clerk came to help. Julius pointed at the quill but asked for one with a sturdier shaft. After buying it, they headed back to the carriage, though the trip home would not be quiet after all. Julius handed the baby to the nanny and told her to watch over her. Then he went back into the shop without explaining. He had noticed someone suspicious and wanted to be sure. A dark-haired girl in a long black dress stepped up to the counter. She was a maid serving the first queen, and she said the curse was getting worse. She needed something right away and was ready to pay any price. At once, she gave the clerk an envelope and he accepted it, just this once. Julius hid behind a large plant to watch. On the envelope, he saw the crest of Baron Liddell's house. When the maid turned to leave, he pressed himself deeper into the corner. As she passed, he noticed part of her hair had changed color. Luckily, she rushed out so fast she never saw him. That was enough to confirm she had the same curse. Without wasting a second, Julius ran outside, but not to the carriage. Inside it, Sarah was already seated with the little one in her arms. Elizabeth also saw the hooded figure leave the shop. She could even sense a magical trail coming from the girl. The power was so strong that Elizabeth was shocked. Then she saw Julius rush out and start chasing the stranger. The girl was fast, but so was he. She vanished around a corner, yet it led to a dead end, and the queen's maid suddenly felt a crushing pressure. It wrapped around her from all sides, so intense it felt like even her bones might crack. When Julius turned the corner, he found only the cloak on the ground. The girl was gone. He had no idea how she escaped, but he decided to tell his father everything. Later, once they got home, the children gave Michael their gift. They even acted like they had picked it out all by themselves to make him happy. But his hard look made Elizabeth worry he might be upset that they went off their route. Seeing that, Julius stepped in to draw Michael's attention away from his sister. Then Elizabeth walked up and called him Dad a couple of times, and that finished the job. The Duke's expression softened more and more until he looked completely gentle. He picked her up and felt a rush of joy. As for the gift, he promised to handle it carefully so he would not break it by accident. Elizabeth was surprised he thought such a sturdy pen could snap. Then they sat down for tea, and Julius shared what had happened. He admitted he felt a little guilty for acting alone, though he believed he had done the right thing. What bothered him most was that he had broken his promise and gone into another store. Julius honestly explained that his sister had shown interest, so he followed her inside. Mikhail noticed Elizabeth sitting there with a guilty look, but he did not raise his voice. He simply told his son to keep going and leave out nothing. Julius then gave his father the same envelope he had later gotten from the shopkeeper. One look at the crest and Mikhail knew it belonged to a servant of the first queen. More importantly, Julius pointed out that she was cursed too. Her face looked sick, and part of her hair had changed color. After hearing all the details, the Duke had no doubt she was under the curse. He had also already heard from the servants that Julius tried to follow her. Both of them found her sudden disappearance strange. Michael picked up his daughter again, kissed her head, and said he was going back to the palace. He told his son to go to Adelina if anything happened. Then he placed his daughter in Julius's arms and stroked her head once more. He told both children not to worry and assured them everything would be fine. As much as he hated leaving his little monkey, he still went. A bit later, Adelina was busy with paperwork as usual when she received a letter from House Lassa, which supplies the royal palace. Adelina remembered Julius's friend, since his father belonged to the Merchants Guild. The letter mentioned tea leaves with healing and refreshing effects, so medicine supplies had increased even though no night expeditions had gone out. Then she noticed a report accusing Julius Waltz. At that same moment, Michael rushed into her office looking deeply worried, and Adelina immediately asked what was wrong. Instead of answering, he set the same notice on her desk. Now he understood she had just received the same bad news. She suddenly felt sick. Adelina had no idea why anyone would accuse her son. She wanted to go straight to the first queen and demand answers. But Mikhail stopped her, warning her not to act too fast. If they rushed in, they could make mistakes, so they had to stay careful as always. Adelina understood and forced herself to stop, but her chest tightened. Mikhail looked calm, yet he was barely holding back his anger. Meanwhile, the children were quietly playing in a large room of the mansion. Julius was reading when he decided to ask his sister something. He handed her a pen like the one they had given their father. From her expression, he had realized she wanted one too. Elizabeth was thrilled. She quickly thanked her brother. Then both of them went back to what they were doing. Suddenly, the door slammed open so hard it nearly came off its hinges. Adam, captain of the first queen's personal guard, stormed in. The maid Sophia tried to stop him, but he ignored her and punched her in the jaw to shut her up. She hit the floor at once, and the captain looked proud of himself. Seeing that, Elizabeth was terrified the nanny might be badly hurt again. 3 knights closed in around Julio while the little girl crawled toward the nanny. Adam declared that young Waltz was accused of killing the first queen's maid. Julio was stunned. He had not even caught her. She had simply vanished. Still, by the queen's order, he was arrested, and the knights dragged him toward the exit. Watching her brother being taken away, Elizabeth did not know what to do. But one look at his face told her he was in serious trouble. He kept insisting he had done nothing wrong and that this was all a mistake, but the captain only shouted at him not to resist. He warned that fighting back would only make things worse, though Julio still expected the truth to come out. There was no proof, just a baseless accusation. Then the captain struck him with magic so he would not dare move. For the first queen's knights, violence came easily. The hit was so hard the boy doubled over, but Adam still was not satisfied and turned on the nanny next. He kicked her in the stomach, a cowardly move. Sophia, just like before, tried to stop him and managed to grab his leg. That was exactly what Elizabeth had feared. She already knew how this would end, and she was right. Adam knocked the maid out and got ready to leave. That way, she could no longer speak against him. They put magical sealing shackles on Julian. He could not understand why they were going this far just to arrest him. Adam sneered that he should be grateful they were not dragging him in chains like a criminal. Then he coldly told the boy to remember his place from now on. After a while, they finally reached the palace, but not the main entrance. Instead, they went to the north side, a place nobles rarely visited. The prayer tower stood there, and Julio realized this was where they planned to hold him. Adam had been ordered to bring him here. He claimed he did not know why and said there was no point questioning the queen's decision. Julio found that odd. He had expected a dungeon. Even so, the tower looked almost like a prison. They climbed a long stone staircase to the top, where a wooden door stood with a small sunlit window. Julio started wondering how this strange turn of events would end. Beyond the door was the tower roof, where a garden and a gazebo waited. The queen was already there. She invited him into her favorite spot and even offered him sweets and tea. That only made Julio more uneasy. He had no idea what she was planning. The queen said she had shown him favor because she had high hopes for him, and she was still annoyed that he had refused her earlier invitation to visit the palace. Then Claudia asked him to swear loyalty to her. She warned that this was his last chance and told him to think carefully. Meanwhile, Elizabeth worried about her brother while Sophia recovered. Julio still had his LP, and she asked him to tap once for yes and twice for no. Luckily, he understood right away, so now the little girl could communicate with him. Sarah, after hearing what happened, was already rushing to their room. Y ella le pidió que tocara una vez, si la respuesta era afirmativa y 2 veces si era negativa. Por suerte, el chico entendió rápido y ahora la pequeña puede hablar con él. Sara, que había oído lo ocurrido, ya volaba hacia su habitación. Sara rushed in, nearly ripping the doors open from panic, and instantly scolded Sophia for putting herself at risk again. Still, she knew Sophia did it because Elizabeth and Julius matter more to her than anything. Then Elizabeth started calling for her mother, making it clear she needed help. Her eyes begged the 2 nannies to do something, and Sarah remembered they were supposed to go to Adelina if trouble came up. The other nanny agreed right away. They had to bring the boy back as soon as possible. But Elizabeth worried about her, since the nanny had been hurt again. Even so, she insisted she was fine and Sarah said she would handle most of it. Carrying the little girl, the two of them set out to do their duty. The Balters were already with the king, but he still couldn't interfere with the first queen. Adelina and Michael understood that well, because the other queen's safety depended on it. Arthur couldn't understand why they came to him for help. Adelina asked him to let them enter the first queen's palace, and when the king looked confused, Miguel explained what happened with the maid. He said she was suspected of spying, and an investigation had already been planned. That changed things and the king agreed there was reason to step in. Michael added that the person was suffering from blackening, likely caused by a curse. That sounded strange to the king since every known way to do that had been destroyed. But curses don't appear on their own. Someone has to cast them. Miguel also mentioned hearing that many people in the palace had been feeling sick. On top of that, rumors said the second queen had fallen ill too. That was why the duke nearly begged his majesty to make the right choice now. The king agreed to grant the request, but said he would oversee everything himself. Meanwhile, Claudia kept pressing Julius to swear loyalty and he began to feel something was off. The smell of nearby white roses made him sick. He felt like even hell would be better than this and still couldn't understand why she wanted him so badly. Claudia admitted she was looking for someone with rare talent and great power. She said Julius had also inherited his parents' intelligence, but he firmly refused. He couldn't abandon his mother and father and insisted there were people far more capable than him. Claudia only told him he was judging himself too harshly. She went on, saying there are things only he can do. Elizabeth heard everything through the LP and prayed her brother wouldn't fall for Claudia's lies. She was already on the way with the nannies, though she still couldn't believe the first queen was behind all this. Julius had started to suspect it too, but without proof, what could they do? He answered Claudia politely. She clearly didn't like that, and now it was starting to seem more and more likely that she planned to deceive Julius too, just like she tricked Liz in her past life. Even so, the little girl believed in her brother, but this was only the start. Can these children find a way to expose the villain together? And that's where chapter 46 leaves us. And honestly, I'm way more emotional than I expected. I'm the tyrant's baby, but my family adores me. Isn't just giving cute family fluff anymore. It's serving that slow, fragile kind of love where every tiny bit of trust feels huge. And I have to say, watching these walls start to crack around Elizabeth is so satisfying. The clinginess, the protectiveness, the awkward softness hiding under all that intimidation. Ugh, it's so good. And now with the family bonds getting messier and deeper, I really need to see how the feelings keep changing from here. We covered up to chapter 46, so there's still a lot more drama, tenderness, and heart-fluttering tension ahead. If you want the next part, don't forget to like and subscribe to Misa channel. Kisses and see you next time.